Hello, and welcome to Broadcasts from Fiddler's Green, my weekly podcast where I talk about culture, politics, the events of the week, and whatnot. So, new setup this week. I decided to go full color. I'm still sporting my wintertime beard, although some people are telling me that I should shave it. And it's actually been a while since I've had my ordinary podcast. It's kind of odd. I did a few live streams over the course of the Christmas break, although I was working during the Christmas break, where I just did podcasts on various different subjects, one with my wife. And I wanted to get back into the swing of doing sort of weekly updates. This isn't always my strongest form because I like writing video essays, and oftentimes things don't really happen in any given week. I felt that this week was one of those weeks that there really wasn't anything going on. There was this horrific case that stuck in my mind of this LGBTQ activist couple that had captured and sodomized and pimped these two small children. And I don't know. And then there was also some mass shootings by, strangely enough, elderly Asian gentlemen perpetrated against other Asian communities. This was sort of an indiscernible news event that it was sort of impossible to make heads or tails out of this. And, just typical degenerate stuff going on in the course of a week. It'd probably be easier to do a show like I Hypocrites Who Can't Stop Progress than to do some kind of analysis show. So I was very much casting about for topics. And one of the topics that I had talked about a variety of times is, a style of thinking that I don't like, that I oftentimes call online autism or artism. And I'll explain what that means later. But it just sort of a way of approaching problems, a way that sort of captures the human imagination. And I was trying to find a way to actually make a talk about this subject, to kind of go into the details to it. But it felt kind of weirdly disjointed. And usually I like beginning things on a little bit more of a personal level and then getting to sort of the technical topics organically over the course of a talk. People should tell me, first of all, is my voice loud enough? Last time people were telling me that my voice was way too soft, the audio was all off. So if you guys can't hear me, just put a U in the chat or something if you think that I should turn the volume up or a plus. It's but really, there's a few things that I think probably we need to talk about just as a society, and this is sort of the topic that I've noticed has been on everyone's mind, but no one's really talked about it. I know Lambda is in the chat right now, and I saw him talk about R.N. McIntyre, which is sort of this revolution in artificial intelligence that's recently emerged over the last 2 months, specifically around neural networks. And this is things like chatbot, GPT, and OpenAI and stuff like that. OpenAI, I think, is the company absorbed by Microsoft that made a variety of these things. And it's I think we should, if you guys want to have a technical rundown of this thing, you can watch R.N. McIntyre's stream with Lambda. I'm going to give you my own kind of 2 cents about this. Lambda, I think, has an optimistic but still incredibly bleak perspective on this technology. Of course, I did a literal video essay that very few people watched about AI, artificial intelligence, and the likes. And I think that people are talking about this. Everyone's afraid of this, and rightfully so to a certain degree, because it represents a sort of technological revolution, and it's very, very hard to see how something good comes out of these sort of hyper-realistic chatbots, these deep fakes, and it's very, very easy to see how horrible things come out of it. This is sort of the transition we've been going through in the last 2 years, the unspeakable horrors beyond imagination. The Peter Griffin meme of the guy enthusiastically turning on the TV. Oh, sweet, unspeakable horrors, unspeakable man-made horrors of unimaginable design. And, chatbot GPT, for those of you who aren't aware, we've always had chatbots. We've always had sort of artificial intelligences that are can pass Turing tests, sometimes not very well, not very consistently, but they're out there. And what's been brewing for a very, very long time, specifically with the technology of neural networks, which is it's a subset of what's called deep learning. And deep learning is sort of this it's highly related to reinforcement learning, where you take these complicated nonlinear systems of nodes, and then you reinforce connections between the nodes by feeding it an enormous amount of information. And, obviously rewarding it for right answers and then penalizing it for wrong answers. And then through an update algorithm, the neural network develops, the network of these software nodes develops an ability to process information, quite sophisticated information, very, very consistently. And this is something that's, neural networks have been old news for 30 years. And so has sort of like strong AI that can solve problems, not general AI. And it's really funny because for a while, I think in the 90s, people were very, very concerned about artificial intelligence. The first memory I have of artificial intelligence and the artificial intelligence threat beyond the Terminator movies was I remember when I was a very little kid, I was really into chess. And the big news back then in the late 90s was that for the first time ever, Deep Blue, which was this like huge archaic supercomputer, had beaten Garry Kasparov, who was, before he became notable for sort of globalist shit-lib politics, about Russia. He was known as being the best chess player who ever lived. During that time, this was sort of the height of the chess craze in the 90s. There were all these movies about chess champions. I think there was one recently with the whole Queen's Gambit sort of thing. But back in the day, the movie was searching for Bobby Fischer. Okay, chess, it's the game of kings. It's the game of intellectuals. I mean, my friends always used to play it during school. And then, there's this shocking revelation that the smartest guy in the world was defeated by a chess computer. And, originally I kind of found this very disturbing, I guess. I found what does this ultimately mean for the human race? Are we all going to be replaced by machines? And people took me aside and went, no. This is not something to worry about. This is not Skynet coming into manifest into being. This is just one program that can look very, very far ahead on this sort of discrete, deterministic problem. It's nothing like actual thought would be. It's nothing like actual, what we usually think of when we think of intelligence. We think of intuition. We think of insight. We think of foresight. And all this is just sort of brute forcing things with a bunch of microprocessors at very, very high gigaflops. And that was comforting. But I always remember to myself thinking, well, hold on a minute. I mean, we just spent the last 2 or 3 years telling ourselves that chess was the most intellectual activity any of us could do, or it was up there with like mathematics and physics. Chess players were Einsteins. How many people in this world have more complicated, more intellectual jobs than a grandmaster at chess? I couldn't think of any of them, but for some reason this kind of got sublimated in my mind, and I went into sort of the computer science related field, and I developed a career in engineering, and all the while I was just fascinated with this idea of the information superhighway. That's a term from the 90s, basically meaning the internet. It kind of dates you even if you use it. But the understanding always was that human beings they were the generative element of the internet. And through the exchange and linking up of human beings, you would create sort of this organic whole. You create sort of this organic consensus of pure thought, of pure conversation, of open discourse. And I write about this a little bit in the article I published. Now, especially with this new development in artificial intelligence, it feels so different, doesn't it? You go to work and you have some tedious job. I do too. Even if it's intellectual, it's usually tedious. You're going through code looking for a bug. You're conducting experiments in a laboratory. You're organizing Excel data. You're writing mission statements. For the most part, this is not highly creative work. This is not highly engaging. And then you come home from work and you get down and take your phone out and check the news. And an artificial intelligence has won a painting competition. Right? I'm going to kind of paraphrase. This wasn't the future we had signed up for. The machines are supposed to be taking on all of the menial tasks, all of the tasks that humanity didn't want to do. All of the tedium was supposed to be absorbed by the AI, and the generative elements of creativity and wisdom were supposed to be the purview of humanity. It was humanity's destiny to engage in this stuff. Now, okay, so does this mean that we're essentially obsolete cogs in the machine of industrial society? Not really. I mean, as people like Lambda have pointed out, and I point out in my article, we are very, very far away from artificial general intelligence of the variety that could do even remotely what a human could do. But this still has the threat of sort of wiping out an enormous number of jobs. But and more than that, it kind of shows you how really since the 90s, there was only one thing holding up or holding back the sort of threat of artificial intelligence from being prominent in humanity's mind. And that was natural language. because artificial intelligence was being used for all of these highly complicated tasks that it would take a human genius to do. And the reason why the artificial intelligence never felt autonomous is because there was no natural language processing ability, so that it could dynamically sort tasks and compartmentalize and then link up those tasks in terms of human language to the point where you could ask for something. So, a great problem for artificial intelligence, if you want to get creeped out, is you tell it to say something like, okay, generate to me a story about this Wikipedia article on Alan Turing, and put it in the style of Dr. Seuss. And it will write you like a Dr. Seuss poem about Alan Turing. And you think to yourself, oh my God, if somebody had shown up at a bar and he was able to, in 5 seconds, create a Dr. Seuss poem about Alan Turing or about Nikola Tesla, I would consider him to be a genius and very clever and someone I really want to know and a quality person. And all of a sudden, here's this chatbot that's developed it. And okay, does this mean that interesting people can be replaced by chatbots? I mean, not really, because there's sort of this sleight of hand going on behind the scenes. You think that how humans conceptualize it is they understand who Nikola Tesla or Alan Turing are, and they're aware of Dr. Seuss emotionally. And then when you try to create a poem about them, you have emotions about Alan Turing and Nikola Tesla, and then you try to structure them into a poem that means something, and then you have to additionally fit it into the rhyme and meter of a Dr. Seuss poem. Well, that's not what the artificial intelligence is doing. It has no concept of these things as independent objects. Someone else, some other human, wrote a poetry template of a Dr. Seuss poem. That template is stored as an object in its library that's linked to Dr. Seuss. And then it grabs a Wikipedia article, takes the nouns and verbs, and then it puts them into the template until it can concoct the appropriate rhyme and meter. And then by brute force or by, some kind of ant swarm optimization algorithm, it gets you through brute force this poem about Alan Turing or Nikola Tesla that's in this form of Dr. Seuss. That sounds incredibly clever. But all of this is sort of pre-digested human knowledge, pre-digested human understandings that has been put through this funnel of artificial intelligence. There's no soul, there's no consideration, there's not the quality you'd get if you were to talk to a human being and actually have them create a poem that had meaning and soul to it. There would be no connection with a person, and there would be no understanding either. There would be no understanding that, okay, this detail about Nikola Tesla's life is not particularly relevant. Someone's correcting me about AI, about the thing. I mean, I know it's a neural network, Bjork, but anyway, if someone wants to correct me on the exact way this processing works, you're free to do so. But this is all pre-digested modules hooked up to a neural network natural language processor. And so so what you're getting kind of is this pre-digested piece of information that's coming out of a neural network that looks very impressive. And this is sort of what has people worried, I think, is that I don't want to say this, I don't want to kind of like catastrophize this, but in many ways, these kind of natural language processors have ended the Enlightenment. Mary Harrington this last week, who's an excellent author and an excellent Substacker, wrote a Substack article called the Post-literate Academy, where she seriously questioned what impact these kind of devices would have on college classrooms. Because now that you think about it, these natural language processors, it's impossible. I mean, for a while, Google made plagiarism impossible, or virtually impossible for people. You could just shove the essays into a search algorithm; it would bring up the sentences that were in common with other publicly available material. You could catch plagiarism, no problem. Now that you have natural language processing that just kind of remix existing templates, it's very difficult to see how plagiarism could catch that. I mean, I guess you could see that if a sentence is massaged in the way that's common for one of these chatbots to do, but then how do you know they're not using something like Grammarly or whatnot? Yeah, someone wants to correct me on the technicalities of how the AI processes these things. This is, looking into it and being not a neophyte in artificial intelligence myself. This is how my understanding of how the chatbots work. But I could be wrong about this. But it's almost immaterial, because there is no general understanding of these concepts. It is just digestion. So Mary Harrington, in her article, imagines an academy where there really are no standards or no entry examinations that are worth anything. What you have is sort of sentiments that are filtered through chatbots and algorithms that can write to the test. And then what you have is sort of people who go through school not actually being able to master the technique of written language and not being required to engage in challenging material, not really being asked to engage in kind of dialectic, the way that we want to think of ourselves doing online. And at all times, there's this kind of risk that humanity closes the loop, so to speak. And this is sort of the risk of all artificial intelligence, is that I go into this in my article, is that it sort of feeds back on itself. It creates a demand for something. It is both the judge, jury, and executioner. So some version of AI creates a standard, and then another version of AI beats the standard. And what you didn't have is you have two adaptive artificial intelligences in control of both the input and the output. And they kind of just obtain enough cycles to just become nothing. They fall down rabbit holes of kind of insane objectives. And this is sort of the theory behind the dead internet theory. Once you have an artificial intelligence selling and an artificial intelligence buying, then all you're going to have is an increasingly large number of sales being made of an increasingly small amount of materials with increasingly small impact on the real world. And this is so much of the Enlightenment was kind of trained us to see human intelligence as being something formalizable. The idea is that once you abstracted something, you got to the heart of it. So once we saw the physical laws in nature, like gravity, like inertia, like the movement of the stars or the waveforms of light, the interference of waveforms, what we had uncovered is sort of the core element of the thing, not simply the shadow of the thing, as someone like Plato would have imagined, that the formal form of any phenomenon is the actual phenomenon. With our current state of artificial intelligence, it's very clear to me, at least, that the imitation of something is not the actual thing. Ask yourself, is the imitation of photosynthesis actually equivalent to photosynthesis? Almost everyone would say no. Even if it was a perfect simulation, it's not the same thing as plants actually photosynthesizing chemicals. But then you have people thinking that they can upload their brain symbolically onto the internet, and that will mean something. The thing is that what chatbot GPT kind of teaches us is that we can no longer rely on sort of this symbolic interpretation of things to get us towards the real organic thing. Art has only the meaning of someone else being on the other side of it. It only has meaning if it's interpretable as a message from another human. If you're interpreting artificial intelligence art, what's really happening is that some other art, some other human has produced, is being mangled and remixed and fed to you. And you're reacting to essentially that distortion. But the spirit that you're sort of feeling behind the art is not being generated by the artificial intelligence. It's being generated by the other humans that put together its constituent elements. And what you're seeing is sort of a refractoring of it, as if you were hearing someone's voice distorted across a distortion field, or if you were seeing somebody's image acting out a play in a house of mirrors. Maybe the play would look better, maybe the play would look worse, but there wouldn't be anything behind it. The core would be the humanity itself. And that would be the only relevant part of it. I'm still waiting. I hate... you always really hate that about people in the chat where you're going on about some technical issue and they go, oh no, you're absolutely wrong about that. And they just disappear. Yeah, if you ever want to troll a YouTuber, that's how you do it. Just correct them on a factual, claim that they're wrong about some kind of factual matter, and then just disappear from the chat, and you'll put them off for the entire stream. But anyway, the important thing though is, as people who are dissidents and as we are humans living in this online world, I think things are about to radically invert. Whereas I think that this artificial intelligence stuff is actually going to force everyone to kind of disengage from their machines, since there's going to be a layer of artificiality around everything that we perceive online. Now, this is if I'm kind of betting against the odds here. I'm kind of betting against the odds because, as everyone knows, as modernity progresses, we only get more and more alienated from the real world. But I'll tell you for myself, the second that this artificial art started popping up on the internet, I started caring a lot less about weird pieces of art that I found on the internet, especially if they looked kind of memey or symbolically automatically generated. It immediately became less special. It became more inflated. I didn't really have the understanding that I was looking at anything profound or insightful, just the process of a subconscious organism percolating or proceeding into the future. And I think the challenge for us going forward as kind of humanity and as dissidents in particular is, and who knows if this is going to happen, but this is what needs to happen. People need to kind of erect a barrier around their lives and themselves and their friendships and the internet. When we come on the internet, we need to understand that we're sorting through bullshit to get to real human interactions, real human connections. It wouldn't do anything for you guys to watch this live stream if you thought that this was being auto-generated. I saw someone did an automatically generated distributist video on Shrek because it's the famous video that I never finished, or famous for this channel. So I'm reading the chat. I can never do that. But I'm groaning now. There's no reason for you to watch this if you think that I'm just generating a template of content for you. The only reason for you to watch this is that you have some reasonable expectation that I'm an experiencer of a life, and that I'm experiencing the same reality you are, and I'm dealing with the same problems as a human as you are, and I have the same values as a human that you do. And that we're both trying to solve this problem of modern life, and you can learn from me and also my mistakes, like reading the chat while doing a stream, and you can take those lessons to your own life, and hopefully, God willing, some of us will be able to meet up in the real world. One of the big, I always say this, the most important modern project we have going on right now is the basket weaving project, where people online try to meet up to do various things. On the East Coast, where I am currently living, we try to have a meetup every month, or that's what we're shooting for. We obviously have conferences. And I feel very strongly that that's the kind of thing that when you sort of conceptualize your interaction with the internet, you want to conceptualize it as you taking something from the internet and incorporating it into your real life. You know, I'm not saying that it can't be entertaining. Obviously, we all have found time. We're all doing things like, cleaning clothes or mopping the floor and mowing the lawn, and we have a podcast on in the background, or driving in our cars. Things that don't require a lot of attention, and we have found time to listen to a podcast. But we need to be careful, because when you look at sort of the Zoomer generation in particular, I really get worried about these guys, because you think when you look at Zoomers that these guys have grown up in the social media age, And they should be developing an immunity to social media pressure. So they should be less influenceable by social media trends, because they've seen 1,000 ones that are bullshit. They should be less easy to deceive through peer pressure. They should be less involved with things like video games, because, when I first saw video games, they weren't a new thing, but this was like, you never had seen a first-person shooter this realistic before. Now they all look the same. And how much is Battlefield 2 versus Battlefield 5, other than the fact that it's progressively getting more woke? The graphics aren't that much better, and so the dopamine hit has got to be wearing off. So you'd think in the Zoomer generation, and maybe this will happen with the younger Zoomers, but you'd think that the Zoomer generation would develop sort of a herd immunity to all this stuff, the wokeness too. They'd be more skeptical of wokeness. They'd be more skeptical of things they learned online. They'd be more involved in real world experiences. They'd be more negative about the negative impact of technology that we've all seen, and we've only really been apparent to us in the last 5 or 6 years. But what I've seen, at least from the original crop of Zoomers, is actually quite the opposite. It actually seems that somehow, maybe this is COVID, somehow their defenses have been eroded. They've become more part of the machine. They've become more pliable to these manipulation tactics. They've become more dependent on the dopamine trip. And the last thing we want to do with this artificial intelligence stuff is submit to it. We do not want to become part of a loop where we are the link between one artificial intelligence telling us that we should want something and another artificial intelligence asking us to buy something. Once you define your life as a consumer node between the marketing artificial intelligence and the procurement artificial intelligence, in my opinion, you've absolutely deleted yourself as a human. And once we stop caring about the authorship or the metaphysical message of art or the spirit of art, we've deleted ourselves as spiritual seekers. There is always an author behind art. There is always a spirit that is behind art. And that spirit and that authorship is always transmitted either from man or from God. And I think of this the same way as I think of the formation of a snowflake. A formation of the snowflake is obviously, it has to do with sort of the turbulent patterns that emerge inside freezing water at very, very high altitudes that creates these, unique little fingerprints that fall down from the sky in these microscopic elements. As sort of a modeler of complex systems, it's an entirely stochastic process, if not chaotic and impossible to predict. But as sort of a believer, as somebody who's looking for metaphysical meaning, the production of a snowflake is the conduit for a higher order that stands behind the laws, and of which the symbolic representation of the laws is simply a shadow. Artificial intelligence is the shadow of humanity. And until actual artificial intelligence, actual general AI comes around, it will always be a shadow. It will not be an independent entity. And God help us if we have to deal with an independent entity. We might have to in the future. But we are very much dealing with something that looks like a dark mirror, a distortion field, and something that kind of lies to us about what we're seeing. And I don't trust it, not least of which because this dark mirror is very explicitly being wielded by people who have explicit ideological agendas and who don't want us to kind of stare through the thing and see the greater spiritual reality. Things are more than their symbols. Things have an essence to them. And if we're not trying to find the essence of these things, then what are we looking for in these endless remixes of meaningless things? The chatbot can generate infinite numbers of mindlessly entertaining variations on certain things. And that's, and I'm sure they'll hit the right dopamine receptors, but that's not what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for something that's just symbolic. I'm reminded of that famous quote from Flannery O'Connor, where someone said, well, I guess you believe that the Eucharist is just a symbol. And she said, well, if it's just a symbol, then to hell with it. And that's the same thing I want to say about art here. The only reason why I consume art is so that I can achieve communion with humanity, and possibly communion with God to a lesser extent. And I see no reason to insert a demon knowingly in between myself and the objective of that, the object of my desire, so to speak. I don't know. The demon is not perfect. The demon is in many ways just random. Maybe they'll reveal something about the source, beauty, that I'd never seen before, purely by chance or purely by the fact that there's some kind of positive good built into the algorithm through reinforcement. But it's not something that I trust, and it's not something that I want to lead me in my endeavors. And once we kind of define ourselves as part of that loop, we've abolished ourselves. I don't see how humanity does not survive without being in many ways more physical than it has in the last 20 years. I don't want to buy art unless I've known it's produced by somebody. And furthermore, I kind of only want to buy art by people who I know share my values. And that's the only way that I can really take something from it anymore. Of course, there's fine art, there's Renaissance art, and I'm not saying that somebody who's a great artist shouldn't try to produce something that's amazing. But I'm going to be looking at it with a different eye. I'm going to be looking more like this person is a spiritual guide to something that I'm trying to reach. There was this stupid ortho-bro meme going around today saying that in order to be an icon maker, like Jonathan Pajot, you have to yourself embody the spirit of the icon. That's an incredibly cheap piece of pop memery, but there's a lot of truth to it. Now, I don't want to lapse into heresy here and imply that the artist's moral direction is somehow constrains the beauty of the art, because as we well know, there were many, many, many great artists who were completely immoral people. But I do think that sort of medieval impulse, that what we want is not so much craftsmen who do a good craft or to do a technically astute thing. And we certainly don't want people who are just disrupting things to create chaos, the way that many of the early 20th century artists saw themselves. All art has to be disruptive and tear away a frame and introduce chaos and anarchy into any kind of established order. I think that the artist or the iconographer, if you prefer, because I think they're going to increasingly become meaningful in the same way, is going to become more of a spiritual guide. And his own humanity and his own wisdom will have to be primary in that. And to the extent that artificial intelligence is used, it's in the form of these non-general chatbots or these non-general image generators, its role will have to be prescribed and limited because it offers too much corruption. It offers too much chance for deception. And what we kind of want to be in a place where we can kind of appreciate the simplicity of things. That's what everyone's missing right now. Fantasy worlds that are remixes of different science fiction realities. We have dozens. But how many pure human moments do we have? There was another meme of circulating on Twitter today about this horrible sort of dialogue that appears in modern video games. And you can look at this dialogue, and I'm sure this wasn't generated by an AI because it was obviously read out by a voice actress. But you can tell that the person who wrote this dialogue for this video game, he was just taking Joss Whedon, making it kind of more girl powery, and then substituting in whatever monsters were in this world to kind of preface some kind of fight scene that the player would play in. Perfectly done little piece of banter with sarcasm inserted to sound like you're a modern person and not a medieval person who actually thinks things have gravity to it, and inserted in kind of a typical beat 'em up 3D game. I'm sure it's really fun and generates a lot of dopamine, but it's exactly that kind of thing that I'm sick of. I kind of want something that's more rough and more organic, and that's not replicable. There was, my friend Anglo Ortho, who, again, I think Anglo Ortho is struggling to find his place in this online community. But the fact that he is struggling to find his place in this online community in many ways makes him one of the more interesting people in the community, because oftentimes his contrarian wisdom takes him in places that's not algorithm friendly, but still kind of what we need to be, the direction we probably should be thinking in. So just this week, he posted a family house concert. Like, he and his family literally did a tiny little desk concert. And now I'm stealing this idea of the desk concert from NPR. Back in, I think it was the late 2000s, early 2010s, NPR started pioneering this desk concert thing where they would have artists, usually indie rock artists, come into the studio and play like their 3 best songs with studio quality recording. And, and this would kind of play like a YouTube video, and they called them tiny desk concerts. And, I was a hipster back then, so I kind of liked those things. And at the same time, I was also kind of into the folk scene. And people would do this too. They would have a party, and they would these were sort of, not professional folk musicians, but kind of, I don't know how you'd really put it, sub-professional. Being sub-professional was a thing back before social media took off. These days, you just be online famous. But back in the day, when you were kind of good at something, but not good enough for it to be your career, there was this sort of realm of sub-professional people. So people who were really, really good at music. Usually they worked as music teachers. But they, and they also, they opened for minor artists at concert venues. And they did something. They knew all the people in the industry, and so on and so forth. And oftentimes they had recording studios. And so these guys, they would put on a show of pretty professional style music, and sometimes they'd even have a professional come over and play for this very, very small audience. And it was a very intimate environment. And so Anglo Ortho kind of replicated this with his own family, doing a family concert for the online world. And, immediately, what's wrong with this? I mean, it's sort of easy to critique because it doesn't fit very well into the YouTube idea of what a YouTube video should be. A YouTube video should play to a certain kind of interest. You tune in here because you want to hear me talk about the culture war. You tune in here because you want me to make critiques of news events, and there haven't been many this week that aren't just disgusting or tragic, that are actually interesting to talk about. And then once you get your brand down, you produce videos that play to that brand, and you accumulate revenue by playing into that. And so is having a concert with your family kind of like good YouTube? Well, no, not really. There's a lot of dead time, and it's totally off brand, and you're mixing your peas and your carrots, so to speak. Very few people who tune in to watch a political show or a philosophical show or a culture show are going to want to watch amateur music. But then at the same time, it's the most genius thing you could do, because it's just those kind of elements of organic culture that are going to increasingly come to define us as creators. Knowing that it's possible to have a family band, that it's good to cultivate these things, that this music is something that can be done intergenerationally, that amateur music is as fun, if not more fun, than buying a CD or listening to Pandora select AI 1.0 select music for you, and then to feeling sort of a deep kind of connection to the people you're looking on screen and saying, these people are my people. These people are the kind of people who I share a common spirit with, that I share a common essence with. And when they're participating in the music, however imperfectly, to kind of borrow a millennial cliche, this is, in many ways, these are kind of the songs of my people. That was something white millennials in particular kind of made fun of back in the Dance of My People, Song of My People. This is an old meme from about 2013 where the joke is you're a white American and you have no culture. But you do have culture. We do have culture. We're marinated in it. And we forget it because there are these flashy objects going on the internet. And we forget that we can live it. And we forget that despite the fact that a lot of stuff is fake on the internet, every now and again, you actually encounter something real. And the point of this entire endeavor of being on the internet is to find the things that are real. I don't make a video or write an essay unless I feel some very, very strong emotion to what I'm writing about. And although that's much, much harder with these weekly podcasts, I don't talk about topics just because they're popular. Everyone wants to talk about, another thing that happened this week, there was a hockey player that got sent home for not wearing a gay pride ribbon. And it's egregious, and it's an example of everything that the right wing has been predicting for years now. It's an example of the left wing's own kind of hysteria and unworthiness to rule. And of course, it's what right wingers want to hear about. But it wasn't particularly emotionally resonant with me because I'd seen it before. And although it's true, and although I think people need help processing it, what I wanted to talk about was kind of new avenues for human existence. Luke Avery, Lambda, had a variety of positive takes on the artificial intelligence revolution that went on this year when he talked to Aaron McIntyre about 5 days ago. Even though I thought the talk was a little bit bleak, I thought he left one out. The reason why this is going to be good for humanity is that artificial intelligence is going to bury the online world in a sea of fakeness. Censorship and artificial intelligence is going to bury the online world in a sea of fakeness, in an ocean of duplicates without meaning, in endless variations of things that mean increasingly little. And we have to the preponderance of the fake might make the real all the more valuable, might make the things that kind of have existence outside of their online existence, outside of their prophelicity, as the philosophers say. It might make those things more valuable and more distinct and more like diamonds in the rough. I think that reason is why the basket weaving project and getting people to meet in real life is so important. If this community of distance can be the community that has a representation of itself offline the same way it has online, that will be something that sets it aside in many ways. I don't think that the left really has that. I think that they have fan communities, but I don't think that they have communities of sort of people, communities of people like that all share in a common spirit, and who aren't just kind of participating in the fandom of something that makes them collectively feel good, but that have committed themselves to some kind of higher principle and value. There's sort of a second part to this talk. One thing is we're going to have to become more organic creatures to distinguish ourselves from the fakeness that occurs online. And the online is only getting more fake. And the era of 2016 where populist movements could spring up is probably coming to a close, online at least. And in many ways, the whole thing is kind of inverted. It used to be that the left wing was the people who were on the ground, and then the right wing was confined to the internet because that's the only place that they could speak openly. I wouldn't be surprised that in a few years it will be completely reversed. The people who basically sell themselves to the algorithms of one form or the other will invariably become leftists of one variety or the other. They'll either become leftists in principle because that's kind of the most comfortable place to be if you define yourself as a consumer of things. Or they'll become leftists in fact, because all of their frames, all of the questions they ask themselves, will be determined by the algorithm, and ultimately by the algorithm's masters, who sit above it all and make sure that the bots, make sure that the artificial intelligences are properly catechized so they can constantly steer the conversations into the avenues that we want them to have. So now we get to the second part of my conversation about, I don't know, about just thinking about things generally. I told you people I do sort of a hanania discussion, and I guess this is a good night as any because I really didn't have a ton of news stories I wanted to talk about. But Hanania was sort of a dissident thinker that emerged on the blogging scene in about 2020. I think he had left a job in academia, and for a while he had become sort of a left-wing apostate to the online right and wrote all sorts of based articles. He had kind of uncovered a few things, and this was big news that left-wingers were talking about it. And it's the standard stuff, like human biodiversity was one of them. And then sort of how another thing was the tendency of politics always to move towards the left. And then finally, I think his most famous article, or at least his most famous one as far as I'm concerned, sort of the unnatural way that feminine perceptions enter into political spheres. He wrote the famous article, How Women's Tears Win in the Marketplace of Ideas. And this is something we're kind of, the left in particular is loath to admit. People on the right admit this all the time because it's plain to see. That when females come into politics, they don't participate in politics the same way that men do. They kind of, what they love doing more than anything else is kind of getting onto the right side and kind of laying down some point and then getting applauded for it, or setting up rules and then kind of excluding everyone, Queen Bee style, from the conversation. So, new rule, you're not allowed to say this, or this, or bring up this topic of conversation because it's offensive. And how dare you even be allowed in the conversation? And so what you have in a lot of these, obviously how it usually works with this stuff, and Hanania was correct to point this out. It works that you have an intellectual space, and at first the intellectual space is governed by sort of male dialectics, so to speak, of the variety that we're used to across most of Western history, but that were very formalized post-Enlightenment. And initially, and I'm kind of rehashing a cycle that's very familiar to the memes from the Gamergate era of YouTube. Initially, the space is open to some women who want to play by the rules. But as sort of the feminine purview is expanded in this space, more and more women come in and sort of establishing new rules. And the rules sort of invariably curtail the conversation so that there are layers and layers and layers of taboo that you can't talk about, or that mean you're a bad person, and that mean that you have to check your privilege and go to the back of the line and examine your soul, and somewhere in that whole dialectic, what's true and what people can commit to and what people actually believe firmly is completely left by the wayside. And what you have is sort of this, again, a game of taboo with all of these different political parties jockeying for favor. And eventually, the limit transforms into the Impression Olympics that we're so familiar with. This is, and of course, you read all of these things from Richard Hanania in 2021, and you think to yourself, this guy, like he's broken the conditioning. If he knows that, HBD is most likely true and has significant impacts on modern results, if he is aware of the corrupting influence of the left on our dialectics, and also that it's sort of culturally unstoppable, that he must have some imperative for the purpose of truth to kind of break through it all. And this is kind of funny because I kind of fell for this in 2021. But my whole story of this intellectual journey was with me kind of not falling for it in the original occurrence. And the original occurrence of this was Steven Pinker. So back in the late 90s, I got my hands on, as a very young, not very young, but as more young than you'd think, adolescent, I got my hands on the copy of The Bell Curve because it was a very controversial book. And as a young, edgy libertarian, you always want to read the most controversial book. And so, reading these arguments about, human biodiversity, I thought to myself, okay, this seems like it's pretty compelling evidence. And then you read the rebuttals, and they're nowhere near as convincing. And this is a pattern that repeats again and again and again. And sort of the shelter you always have for this belief is two things. The first thing is that it doesn't really matter, because obviously, why would HBD matter? We're all individuals, and you can just judge people based on their individuality. And so, if you rationally apply individualism to this problem, it won't actually be an issue. The other one, of course, is that there's uncertainty in this process. We don't know that HBD is strongly true. We only suspect that it is, and we still don't know about this stuff. We only think that there's strong evidence that it probably is the case. And then the third one is that, there are adults in the room that they are reading the same research we are. And so, and they're the people who are in charge of society. And so they're not going to make any big mistakes. They're not going to bet the farm on human biodiversity being false when it's very likely to be true. So they'll maintain the noble lie on, like Plato talks about, maintaining the noble lie for the plebeians, because this is a truth that has to be suppressed. But in the inside of the halls of power, they're rational people. These things are being discussed and processed. Because right after I discovered this stuff in Charles Murray, I immediately encountered Steven Pinker. And Steven Pinker was sort of my solution to the possibility of HBD. Was here as this very rational guy who's connected to all of the big brain people at Harvard and Princeton, who's a linguist who wrote best-selling books, and progressives really listened to him. And he was a new atheist too. He was down with all the modern secular stuff, all the modern best practices, the reality-based community. He was big on that, right? And he obviously he's written about how the blank slate theory of human populations is false, how there likely are differences that we cannot overcome, whether they are cultural or biological, between different groups. And he'll be able to make sure through his policy advocacy that our leaders know that they can't, make bad bets on this. And he'll also protect other honest individuals from being persecuted. And, this perception lasted until a variety of other prominent scientists, like James Watson, got canceled for talking about the same stuff that Steven Pinker did. And Steven Pinker kind of, shrugged his shoulders and watched these people get... Frog stepped off the stage and completely defrocked for talking about the same truths that he was roundly applauded for bringing up among moderate progressive audiences. And you kind of realize, and this is the path that Hanania takes too. He admits to all of these problems with a modern frame of processing information. And then he just doubles down on the framework. He's like, his latest article this week, and it kind of shows you how this line of thinking goes. Because I'm sure Steven Pinker could have maybe Steven Pinker has written the same article, but this is how it goes. Like, the media and the academy are overwhelmingly honest. It's the only thing that the media really lies about are race, sex, class, gender, and then maybe some choice questions about biology, epidemiology, climate, climate and statistics. And aside from that, most of the other stuff is good. If there is a report about Miss Marple's cat climbing a tree and it being rescued by the firemen on Fifth Avenue, then, that's almost certainly true. Probably Miss Marple's cat did climb a tree on Fifth Avenue. And if there's a war between Angola and Mozambique, or between Congo and Rwanda, the New York Times will tell you that that war is going on, and they'll accurately report the size of the armies. And there's all these facts that exist here. And doesn't that mean that the media is overwhelmingly trustworthy? All of this stuff is complete bullshit. What we see from the Steven Pinker example is that he's willing to support policies that would be disastrous if HBD is true. He knows HBD is true, and yet he still supports the policies because he's being politically pressured to. And I'm sure he's got some some future generation is going to fix this problem. Some future generations of thinkers is going to have to sort out how we're going to have a society obsessed with racial equality that can't possibly achieve racial equality. Some future thinker, that'll be my grad student's project. And then he kind of nods along and chuckles along in his academic chair. Well, greater scientists than him have their careers destroyed for speaking the truth. And what we've learned, and I can't believe this needs to be gone over again. It is very, very apparent once the system has a mechanism for lying. So we know that academics are required to lie about these topics. You're required to essentially lie about the core topics of identity: transgenderism, race, sex, class, epidemiology, public health. But the problem is that once this lie has become mandatory in the academy, any other topic can be basically doused with this lie. They can be covered in the and smell of this topic. And then a topic that was previously neutral is going to start becoming like those verboten topics that has a right side and a wrong side to it. Sort of like a can of invisible paint. Once you've invented the can of invisible paint, it doesn't stay in the can. It can be applied to anything, and then suddenly the thing you paint the invisible paint on becomes invisible. And so what we see in the Western Academy is that everything is becoming doused in the invisible paint. It's being consumed by the political, and therefore it ceases to become a truth-telling entity. You can do this with any single thing you can think about. And so Hanania's goal of trying to cordon off the woke era into some kind of small ghetto where that can be excused and have the relative smallness of that ghetto exonerate the rest of the truth-telling apparatus is absolutely ridiculous. Furthermore, Hanania, and what's so funny is that you can kind of see that the autistic mind, how the autistic mind works. And this is sort of my crusade against internet autism, or what I sometimes call internet artism. So those of you who read scientific papers are well aware of this concept of R-squared values. Now, I'll get this definition right. The R-squared value represents the amount of a variation in a model variable that can be accounted for by a change in another input variable. So if something has a high R-squared value, then the R-squared value, it's going to indicate that in the model, the variance in the input variable is very highly correlated with the response variable's behavior. And this is something that every paper kind of relies on this to get relevance. What a typical sociological model will do is it will have something that it wants to measure, and then it will have some input that it thinks is the culprit behind that thing, and then it will come up with some kind of linear model that will show that whatever they're measuring has a very high R-squared value. The correlation is very, very high. And this linear model has a high predictive capability when it comes to this other variable. And you see this in sort of the publish or perish mode of sociology. It's actually very, very easy to get these. Oops. I think my hold on, guys. My camera just went out here. I'm going to have to redo this again. Give me a second. Wouldn't you know it? Okay. All right, there we go. Okay, so the R-squared values, it turns out, are very easy to manufacture by retooling a linear model. And so when it comes to sort of public intellectuals that don't think deeply about these problems, they kind of have this worshipful quality about these numbers that appear inside abstracts of academic papers. So they'll go like, well, this is a high R-squared value, therefore this must be the explanation of the phenomenon. And the problem is, in all of this, is that none of these kind of models are a very good way of approaching problems. So the classic one that Richard Hanania blocked me. And he blocked me over a certain argument that I thought was the stupidest thing ever. And it represents, there actually were two arguments. I don't know if Richard Hanania has spoken on the second one, but it was certainly the first one. The first one was, everyone can see that there is a big relationship between secularization and wealth. Hanania argued that secularization causes wealth, when it is absolutely clear that to anybody who looks at these phenomenon that wealth causes secularization, and that is the primary relationship. And so he went on a tirade on Twitter about how secularization was the best thing ever because it created wealthy societies, without backing up a second to think about, okay, well, like, what am I actually saying about history? What am I actually saying about humans, how humans behave? How do what I was saying actually apply to real world circumstances? He just, this paper told me that secularization causes wealth. So therefore it must be true because there's a high R-squared value, and then they have high confidence. And so you look at all these papers, and what they say is, okay, well, these societies, we measured societies, and in these societies, they all get secular at the same time that they get rich. But the secularization always has a phase offset, right? So it always occurs slightly before the increase in wealth. Therefore, secularization causes wealth. This is total bullshit. This is manufactured, and I don't know. I don't want to turn this into a statistical talk at all. And I'm speaking off the cuff here to a certain degree, but you can't think about things this way. It's insane. The offset, what's obviously going on between secularization, and it behooves us to think about actual examples of this. Think about actual people who became less believing in God and who got rich. So, my father, for instance, who was born in a very religious society, he came to the New World, he came to North America, he discarded his religious beliefs and got highly educated and then became upper middle class by the end of his life. According to that process that we witness in my father's life, his secularization caused his wealth. Because that's what we're measuring, right? He got secular before he was rich, right? No. What happened is that there was an initial property of being educated caused by him moving to a wealthier society. Because the education brought about by the wealth causes the secularization to occur early in life, and people only get richer later in their lives when their earning potential comes online, there will naturally be a phase shift that prioritizes secularization slightly before wealth becomes apparent. Because I actually know how humans operate, I don't need to sit there and look at a linear model and then measure phase shifts in R-squared values, thinking that somehow, if I were to just take people's religion away, that means they would get richer. I mean, think about this like an actual human would. And this is why this is connected to the whole AI thing. How many times have you heard this? Man, when we fell on hard times, that's when everyone they turned to God in hard times, and that's what got them through. Or conversely, how many times have you heard this? They were very devout, but when they got rich, they didn't really go to church anymore. Or how many times, have you heard, when my family went to college, people stopped becoming so interested in religion because we were able to send all our kids to college. All of those are examples of how wealth leads to secularization. Now let's put the shoe on the other foot. How many times have you heard the following? Jim became an atheist, so I expect his productivity at work to go up. Or, this society has just been taken over by a communist regime that's banned religion. That means their productivity and technology is going to skyrocket. How many times have you heard that? If you were a space alien, or even an advanced race of humans that encountered human beings of a technological level around the 16th or 17th century, like Japan maybe, during the Meiji Restoration, would you assume the following? That if we dump wealth on these people, they will slowly begin to discard their religious beliefs? Or conversely, would you believe that if we ban these people's religious beliefs, they would spontaneously generate technology and wealth? I mean, to ask the question is to answer it. This is the stupidest idea in the world, and it's completely manufactured by myopically looking at these statistical measurements that are only crutches for a deeper understanding of the phenomenon actually going on. The other example of this, and I have weird light things going on, another example of this that came up recently, and this was an earlier conversation that I had with the alternative hypothesis. So everyone is aware of this famous study called the Putnam effect, the Putnam study. Now, the Putnam study was the famous one that showed diversity was highly correlated with negative social outcomes. So people, when you looked at people's ability to participate in organizations like bowling leagues and charities and so on and so forth, and you compared that longitudinally and laterally to more diverse communities that got more diverse. The more diverse the community, the less people actually engage with each other in community. And this is a study that was done by Robert Putnam, famous author of Bowling Alone, and he famously sat on it for years and years and years. And it was published in, I think it was like 2010, these results. It was an addendum to the Bowling Alone stuff that came out earlier. And the thing is that once this guy published these results, a few other studies came out and they confirmed his results. And then about 6 or 7 years later, people started publishing like opposition research saying the exact opposite. And this hit around 2016, 2017. And the guys at the alt-hype, there are two of them, I forget their names. One of them was Sean Last, I believe. And these guys looked at these new opposition studies, and they totally freaked out. And the opposition studies said that, actually, Putnam's wrong. Diversity does not correlate with bad social outcomes. This is an anomaly. What correlates with bad social outcomes, what actually is being measured is IQ and wealth. And once you put IQ and wealth into your linear model, they have higher R-squared values. So that must mean that they are the culprit behind this thing. And so, Sean Last and the other alt-hype guys released a series of videos retracting this sort of finding. And it's a big splash, and everyone's really, really confused about what's going on. And then 2 years later, more studies came out confirming the original Putnam hypothesis that diversity does not lead to good social outcomes, that this is a net negative. And what happened? Well, what happened is creating models and asking questions and putting questions to formal models is a lot more art than science. And so you can manipulate the question to get what you want out of it. And what people want out of this question, or what progressives want, is they understand very definitively that social cohesion and social trust are a function of class. And the higher class you get, the more cohesion there is. So if you allow class and IQ to be one of your model variables, it will absorb an enormous amount of the explanatory power, especially since richer people, especially richer upper middle class people, not richer upper class people, but richer middle class people, I should say, oftentimes use their wealth to get out of highly diverse areas. You can use wealth as a proxy, and it will absorb the explanatory value otherwise taken by the presence of diversity. Like, for instance, can you have a highly cohesive, diverse community? Of course you can. In fact, I come from one. I grew up in one. I grew up in a highly diverse community that was highly socially cohesive, low crime, perfect schools. It was amazing. But it was a university town. It was a product of a very particular and discrete style of wealth. The people there who were diverse mainly were Asians and whites, and the non-Asians and whites who were there were selected for having professional jobs, and they all had the same values. And so if you're going to use, if that is going to be a data point in your case about how diversity does not cause social problems, you've got something seriously wrong. There's nothing about that community that is a good organic measurement of how diversity is actually going to impact a community. The question we're actually asking about diversity is, if we take a community that's highly cohesive, like a small town in Minnesota that's middle working class, and we dump a bunch of people from Somalia on that small town, can we expect that small town, even if its GDP goes up, to become more or less socially cohesive? And to do that, you need to look at the effects that are not being absorbed by these sort of ghost variables in the equation. And in these circumstances, the results, I think, are very clear. That this kind of culture shock causes people to become turtles and withdraw from society. And unless you're essentially filtering people for a common ideology and using wealth to get people together, that this is going to have zero impact on the ultimate output of your model. And so, okay, how do you detect that in terms of how do you come up with a standard for filtering out the bullshit that you can explain to a computer? That is there a number, like an R-squared value, that can detect the bullshit on one linear model and not the bullshit on the other? No, there really isn't, unless you know what we're actually describing. The problem is that the language we use to describe the problem is being confused. The actual question people ask is, we have a society that works a certain way, that has a variety of people of different income and education and IQ levels. If we diversify that society, what will the outcome be? That's the question. The question is not whether richer people are more socially cohesive in diverse societies than very, very poor people are in homogenous societies. That's not the question, especially when those highly diverse rich people have some other filtering mechanism, as rich people do, to make sure that everyone who lives around them has functionally the same secular religion as they do, and has the same set of educational experiences that they do. You're chasing ghost variables as opposed to actually asking the question that was put in front of you to begin with. This is the problem with the modern academy, is that so much the modern Enlightenment wants us to conceptualize all questions as simply problems of computation power and mathematical insight applied to a given field. And that's how Richard Hanania imagines himself too. Oh, I'm just going to dump CPU cycles on the problem. The real issue is the kind of question you ask and the constant equivocation that goes on in the academy between the questions that we actually need to have answered and the questions that are getting answered. And in this game of not equivocating, these flaws that Hanania points out in the epistemological system of the West, pertaining to identity and pertaining to who wins in dialectic arguments, are going to ruin any attempt that we have to get at the truth. They'll bury everything. In order for there to be any kind of educational reform, The value system of the university has to be torn down. Because without the proper value system, there's no incentive to ask the right questions that are actually pertinent to running and managing a society well. And so what's Hanania going to do? He's going to ask himself endless questions about increasingly meaningless things. Like, does secularism cause wealth? What, in a test tube? In Sim Earth? In what world? In a world where you have to be secular in order for Galileo to invent the telescope or to improve the telescope and see the moons of Jupiter? In a world where you have to have where you have to have new atheism in order to have quantum computers? These are fictional worlds that are constructions of a question that does not actually exist, and who will continuously be hampered by a political order who does not want them to exist. Chatbot GPT makes sure that you can ask good questions to it. It will always give you accurate answers. It'll always give you answers with a right R-squared value. Richard Hanania himself has commented on the fact that it'll always give you accurate answers. But the same censorship applied to you by Chatbot GPT is applied to you by the modern academy, and will stifle any attempt to internalize these lessons and wisdom into an educational apparatus that can actually act and fix things. In the same way that any icon carver has to be living in the mode of an icon himself to be doing his trade properly, any proper data scientist has to be living in the mode of a philosopher, or moreover, a philosopher king. He has to have direct responsibility over something that he's managing, over something that he actually stands to lose. He has to have the right value system. The second he's incentivized by lies is the second he stops asking the proper questions. And once you stop modulating your questions and reframing things and imagining thought experiments and picking apart the various ways that lies are built into complex models, that's the second you fall down the Autism rabbit hole and become another cog in the wheel of machine learning models. I don't want people to just babysit a machine learning model while it just spews out confirmation about why the bugman postmodern lifestyle is the healthiest, because we can compare our elevated lifespan to peasants in the 14th century who didn't have penicillin. If you re-ask that question, you can be like Steven Pinker and ignore all modern crises, because you're essentially continuously measuring and remeasuring the impact of technology that was invented 80 years ago, and patting yourself on the back because the fruits of those technology are playing out in the background, all the while the academy that you're a part of is burning all faith it has in a truth, and ignoring some of the biggest problems that we're staring down right now for the survival of the human race, one of which is AI. There cannot be value-free education. There cannot be a value-free academy. There cannot be a value-free lover of truth. And human knowledge and wisdom has to be organic. The time of working through these institutions is gone. And you know, if you want to follow, am I going to fall for another Richard Hanania in the future? Probably, because the prospects and the temptation that they put forward is just so delicious. They want you to imagine for a moment that they're going to walk into the academy and nail the theses of women's tears when in the marketplace of ideas to the door of the provost of UC Berkeley. And this is going to trigger some kind of educational reformation. But these people are slaves. They're playing the algorithm for controversy. And I don't think they're even really aware of the truth that they're portraying here. In order for any kind of dialectic to be meaningful, there has to be an understanding of common value. And in order for any art to be meaningful, there has to be an understanding of common experience and common purpose. Anything that goes through a machine, no matter how high the R-squared values are, is going to be absolutely meaningless. because it's so amenable to manipulation. You change the definitions of words a hairbreadth, and you'll get entirely different results. And the prompt will sound kind of similar to the question you really need to have answered, but it will have nothing to do with the actual question we're dealing with as a society living in the 21st century. There'll be mythological constructions. There'll be trolley problems. A trolley problem is the perfect example. You sit there with a trolley problem and you can argue for months and weeks and days over these ridiculous questions of ethics. And in the meanwhile, all your students have become nihilists who see that the only positive good in the world is their own pleasure. Over dinner, and this is horrible dinner time conversation, and I'm about to close out here. My wife and I were talking about the horrific case of the two LGBTQ activists that had adopted and sodomized and pimped out these vulnerable children who are themselves children of drug addicts. And it was horrific. And my wife, who had followed the story more closely than I had, she mentioned that the reporter who followed up on this horrific crime had visited these men in prison. And what the reporter commented on was they were completely guiltless. They had no concept of feeling moral weight whatsoever. They were complaining about the prison food, talking about how they could, make their lives in prison more enjoyable and whining about it. They had no understanding of the gravity of their crimes, or even that they were being, even if they thought they were innocent, they had no understanding that they were being accused of something that was horrific. It was just a mode of how can I maximize my pleasure. This is a generation of people that we have raised to be complete nihilists. While we were arguing over the right way to flip a switch in a completely hypothetical question about saving human lives from oncoming trolleys. The mode that we have to live in is to teach people to feel the magnitude of morality and the magnitude of human value at a visceral level. That is the point of an ethics education. It's not to autistically fall into logical rabbit holes. And it's the purpose of the university, it's the purpose of the academy that's completely been obliterated by the symbolic enlightenment. That, ironically, AI could have just abolished by making the pretense of standards themselves impossible to detect. And maybe this is the invitation to something more organic. Maybe this is the invitation for us to build organic human relationships with each other and to have these podcasts, these interactions, these video essays kind of be the shadow of the work that we're doing as a community online, so that people can see the record if they want to catch up. The point of the house concert is to have a house concert. Its existence as a YouTube video is more or less just something that we're sharing with the world in case people want to actually copy the process in their own homes. But it's not the actual thing. It's the simulation of photosynthesis. It's not the real photosynthesis that generates sugar from light. The real point of a family band is to have a family band, not to get clicks on the internet. The real point of having a YouTube channel, for myself at least, although I appreciate the tips, I'm not going to lie, is to meet interesting people that I can actually talk to about controversial topics. The best thing about last year's Soldings conference was that I could come into contact with people and genuinely and shake their hand and meet them and be genuinely surprised by them. And there's some people who work I've always been impressed with, like Charlemagne. Meeting him for the first time, he has this gravity about him that I found deeply compelling. And Paul, who's somebody who I get into fights with his Twitter feed all the time. I'm not trying to cast aspersions on Paul, and I don't want to damn him with faint praise, but I kind of find his Twitter feed to be a little bit boring. But Paul Fahrenheit in person is a deeply interesting individual. He has a deep soul to him. He's an old soul. And you know that he has, somewhere in that soul is the spirit of a great piece of art that you will only really understand if you can kind of understand the life that he's living and kind of share in it and participate at the same level as he does. That's the real thing that we're going for. The Twitter feed and the public persona we portray on YouTube and Twitter, that's the shadow. And after the incident of AI, it's going to be increasingly a shadow of lies. It's going to be increasingly a mirror of lies held up by our enemies. Poe the person did this great video. Well, she didn't do a great video. I haven't liked either of these videos, but they're kind of entertaining. She's taking sort of cringe, paused material and trying to do defenses of so Frozen and Steven Universe. She tries to do apologia of these horrible pieces of fiction. And the one I remember was the Frozen, because Frozen is based. I've only seen like parts of it here and there. It's not like I haven't had the opportunity to see Frozen. I've specifically made the point of not seeing Frozen because I know it's based on my favorite fairy tale of all time, Hans Christian Andersen's The Ice Queen. And Hans Christian Andersen's The Ice Queen begins the premise of the story kind of having not very much to do with the Ice Queen. The devil constructs this mirror, and this mirror shows reality exactly as humans recognize it. So humans look into this mirror, and they can't see any difference between this mirror and the real world. But the mirror slightly emphasizes the worst elements of everything. So you see a flower and it doesn't have the luster or the beauty. It doesn't have the magnetism. You can't put your finger on what's different about the flower. You can't put your finger, but it's not the same. It doesn't have the same spirit as the real world. Everything that goes through this mirror seems to have its soul stripped away, its purpose mangled. And while it's not altogether gone, it's hidden. So that everyone who looks into the mirror sees the worst and most degraded nihilistic element come out of the mirror. And then at the beginning of the Ice Queen, this mirror is shattered into 1,000 pieces, and they blow off into the wind. And every now and again, these shards of mirror land on people's eyes, and they become incapable for however long these shards are in there from seeing anything beautiful or meaningful or organic about the world that we live in. That dark mirror is what we're currently staring into. It's the artificiality of social media being twisted by demons to obscure everything that's actually meaningful that goes on in the real world, and to emphasize things that really take us into the worst possible directions. This is the goal of our age. We're all on social media. I use it. You guys use it. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. And in some ways, we have to interact with humanity's shadow because it's a tool that we can't live without. But we always have to be like a captain who's taking his ship against the wind. And good captains can do this. The wind goes one way, and because you have, I don't know what's the sail called, like the flip sail or something like that. You can actually go against the wind by redirecting the flow of air. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're trying to construct a community here online that pulls in the opposite direction that online naturally wants to go in, which is towards more profligacy, more artificiality, more drama. We want the exact opposite of that. We want at the end point to have a more human existence. All right, guys, so that's the end of my spiel. I'm going to take a slight water break and do an intermission. I've got an intermission slide here. And when I come back, I'll do super chats. The entropy link is pinned in the... Oh, it's not. Oh, dear me. Okay, I guess I did not pin the entropy link. But here's your chance in case you want to participate in this second. Okay, there we go. That's the entropy link. I will be back in a few minutes to answer your guys' questions and to wish you a happy night. Oh, also, by the way, this is the vigil of Burns dinner. If you're Scottish or love Scottish culture like we are and are so inclined to celebrate this set of evenings, this is when we celebrate the poet Robert Burns, which I might talk about during the Super Chats. But in the meantime, I'll see you guys in a few minutes. All right. I'm back, and let's get the super chat window up here. See if I can. Okay, great. All right. Great. I hope I have fixed entropy. Guys, please let me know, do you like this new setup? That's a little bit more simple than my last one. I like sort of the two windows thing. I think that works a lot better. So, okay. Franklin's asking me, do you like the Petersons? I don't know. The Petersons? Like Jordan Peterson and his daughter? Can't say I'm the biggest fan recently of their work, but maybe you can clarify. I am doing a live stream with the Franklins soon. I need to get a new video out, and things are always busy these days. But anyway, guys, the entropy link is in the description if you'd like to ask me a question. One thing, guys, I want to encourage everyone to look at basket weaving. I will include a link to the basket weaving Discord server in the first pinned comment on this live stream once it goes public. Everyone who's stopping by later can check it out. But I do think that an objective needs to be and this is something that a variety of people are working on in the academic agents community. And don't worry, we're not actually basing this on Discord. We're not going to make the same mistake as we did last time. Discord is simply a mirror to the server that we're running independently, and that is going to be eventually, I think, autonomous. And the point is going to be eventually the idea that no matter where you are near a major population area, if you're in somewhere, if you're in Central Australia, you may be SOL, right? But oh no, did my thing again? This is ridiculous. Okay, get 1 second, guys. 1 second. Just wonderful here. Okay, there we go. All right, sorry about that. It always seems I do want to promote basket weaving. I do want this idea that we can sustain things online and that's going to be the cornerstone of something going forward. I think this is a fleeting proposition. I think increasingly content creators like myself are going to be holding their real life and their online persona closer. I mentioned this in a stream I did a week ago actually, with the Traditionalist and Jay Burden, that I'm just tired of living a double life at this stage. I kind of want things to be as they are, right? I want to talk about things earnestly for once. And part of how that's going to open up is if people aren't isolated. I did this poll on Twitter. I know Twitter is a hell site, but it's just the best. It's the best networking application out there. I can't come up with any replacement for it. But I did a poll about how many friends, not family members, people had that you could talk to about modern controversial issues the way that we talk about them here. Are you serious? Did this thing? This is egregious. Sorry, guys. I'm sorry about this. Okay. I don't know what's causing my camera to continuously fail. Maybe I need a new computer, but I'm so averse to getting new computers. And it used to be when I got a new computer, that was like the coolest thing ever. From 1998 when I got my first computer, well, I think it was actually 2000 when I got my first computer, to 2010, that entire decade, every new computer was just like a new world had opened up. A new range of possibilities was there. Now, I hate computers. I don't want to get a new computer. This thing is old and it's falling apart. And I still don't want to get a new one because it feels kind of dirty somehow. It feels like I'm a slave to technology. But that also means that my technology is kind of falling apart here. I'm still using the same Blue Yeti microphone I got like 3 years ago. So, there you go. Anyway, I should get to the super chats here. Ben White. Oh, well, classic Ben White. Thank you very much. Everyone says they love your super chats. And it's always good to hear what's going on in your real life. So Ben White, friend of the channel. We really should meet up one of the. I don't know where you are, Ben, but I've heard so much about your life. I'd love to actually, have you over for dinner and you can tell me about some of these things in person one time. Ben White for $3 USA. Hi, Dave. My work colleagues, mostly 20s like me, invited me to go bar hopping with them on Saturday. I'd never gone bar hopping before. Do you think that I should go? Yeah, sure. Bar hopping is like the most boring thing imaginable. It's just like you go to a bar, you get a drink, you goof around with your guys, you say hello to the people there, you play some games of darts or whatever the thing is they have there, and then you go to another bar. And then rinse and repeat 4 or 5 more times. I don't particularly like it. But it's an experience, and I don't get drunk. I don't think that's a good thing, right? But I don't know. Modern bar hopping. The idea guys always have when they're bar hopping is that they're going to meet like some girls and they're going to make these really great connections with them. In my experience, that rarely happens unless you're in like a college town that has particular bars where everyone's kind of going out to meet people. For most adults, this is not how things work. And usually you just have the same set of conversations you would have with maybe 1 or 2 other strangers in the same circle of bars, usually within 2 neighborhoods of each other. So I don't know. It's fine. It's such a boring activity that when the British set of comedians did that parody, what was it called, The World's End, about a bunch of adults, men who go bar hopping, even the existence of robot alien replicants couldn't make the experience of bar hopping interesting. It was still a boring movie about bar hopping, even though they were being pursued by robotic replicants with blue blood. And that's, I don't know. It's an experience, usually a pretty boring one, but, as long as you guys don't do anything that's otherwise unethical, I don't see any problem with it, I guess. It's part of our dying pub culture. All right, Ben White for $5 USA. I've noticed a trend among millennials and Zoomers that I know. Their work friends become their only friends and practically their entire social circle. The social life thus depends on them being employed at the company. How do I avoid this? Well, you avoid this by getting a third place. And this is why I always hated bar hopping, because the way you meet people that aren't, so, I mean, in case people are aware of this, I forget who wrote this book, but there was some social, I think it was an ex-CEO who wrote this book about social cohesion and how to fix the problems. It was like Bowling Alone, but before Bowling Alone. And he said that people have three places. The first place is their home. The second place is their place of work. And the third place is the place that they have that's recreational, that's for social activities. And this guy, people copied his model, and there's a bookstore in Seattle called Third Place Books. And when I first saw it, I was, where's First Place Books? But it would actually, what the bookstore tries to be is a hangout place for people to come and hang out with people. The reason why bar hopping isn't very much fun, or pub culture isn't very much fun, is that most people only meet people in their third places. And if you don't have activities that you do that you're really heavily invested in, if you go to a bar or another place this is a tourist, people don't really make connections to you very well. You're just another face that's passing through this particular organization. And you don't really have a presence there. And the only way, and especially post-COVID, we've gone from people that have only had two places to being people that have only had one place. But post-COVID and post the disintegration of the American social order, people need a long time to sort of warm up to you. So if you have a parish, you have to stick with that parish and meet the people and know them. If you have a nerdy hobby, like you have to do it like once every month continuously, or maybe a more productive hobby like music, like playing in a band or something like that. You have to do it continuously to build up the pattern of life. This is the great irony that as we become more socially isolated, the patterns need to be stronger, not weaker, to forge a friendship. When people all knew each other and were all friends, the stranger that came into the pub, everyone would be kind of curious about him and open to him. But now when everyone in the pub is a complete stranger, all doing their own little bar hopping routines around the same gauntlet, and they'll never see each other again because half of them are from out of town, and in 2 years, half those guys will move away anyway. Well, then what's the point in learning people's names and places of origin and all that sort of stuff? What's the point of reaching out? This is the same irony that occurs with Zoomers. As Zoomers become exposed to more pathologies of the modern era, they seem to become more susceptible to them. In the same way that the more you're exposed to poison oak, the more susceptible you become to it. The more socially isolated we are, the more of a pattern you need to establish to get the same level of connection and social cohesion you had before. And that's the regrettable part of it. You're friends with people at work because you have a pattern of work. If you have a pattern with another organization, you will start to develop friends in that organization too. It's really that simple. And increasingly, I'm interested in joining organizations that I don't have to keep my own views on the world a secret. Really, all you need is a few things that mark yourself as a thought criminal. And if you're free to voice those things, you can kind of test the water with other ideas very slowly if you're careful about them. And that's sort of the way I'm thinking these days. But at any rate, Ben White, thank you for the super chat. I'm going to go on. Okay, Novum for $10 USA. If boys must play video games, one big problem I see with them is that they're playing League of Legends and Fortnite instead of Dota 2 and Call of Duty. I know video games aren't ideal, but at least Dota 2 is uncensored and will make you into a man, like Call of Duty did back in the early 2010s. I had never played either League of Legends or Dota 2. I thought that Dota and League of Legends were virtually identical games to each other. I thought they were just different variations of the same sort of tactical, tactical strategy game where you control the single character in a war. And maybe I'm wrong about that. I know my brother used to be really into Dota, but not that into. I don't think he's ever into League of Legends. I assume there's a reason why people prefer one over the other. But to me, it always seemed like they were kind of the same. I don't know, man. Video games have just. I'm just the wrong person to ask about video games because the only video games that I play are like if I'm really tired, I'll play like a video game of a card game that I play in real life, right? I don't play like simulated games where you don't know the rules. For me, a game is not a game unless you know every single one of the rules and you're thinking about the probability that go into the random events inside of that game. Once there is sort of a layer in that thing, then it ceases to become so much a game in my imagination and starts lapsing gradually into a simulation. I think things like Dota and StarCraft are still closer to being games than they are to being simulations, but still, the conflict's still there. I should have gotten more water while I took my break. But thank you, Nova. All right, Ben White, $3 USA. Let's flip the script tonight, David. Dave, tell me about your daring escapades in the bar scenes when you were a young 20-something man. Was the West Coast better back then? Well, I mean, that's kind of a weird question because, like I said, I don't think I have a single... The only bar hopping scene I ever remember that was of note was in Detroit in New Year's. And my friends decided to go bar hopping. And nothing ever interesting happens on the West Coast because on the West Coast, at least when I was on the West Coast, every single bar hopping scene has got the same set of pretentious breweries and little cute pubs and English diners and sort of more dance hall-y places. They all have the same set of those things. And it feels like deja vu between Seattle and Portland and Berkeley. Maybe Berkeley's a little bit different, but no good memories, aside from the conversations I had with people, have ever come from those places. The only time where I can think of like the actual scene was interesting was in Detroit when it was New Year's and my friends said, oh, well, let's go into the city because there's bound to be something happening in Detroit because it's a big city during New Year's. And in the big downtown area, there was like one open place in Greektown and the rest of the entire area felt like a windswept ruin where nobody lived and where there might be just lurking creatures with knives waiting in the alleyway to mug you. And I remember wandering around this place in this bar hopping environment, feeling like I'd walked onto the set of some kind of an apocalyptic horror movie, and it felt like the whole city was in ruin, and the whole city is in ruins in Detroit. So what am I talking about? But it was just bizarre because it was the absolute busiest night of the entire year, and there was nobody. There was one scene there. So I don't know. Describe something that's inherently uninteresting as being interesting. Really hard to say. I don't know. Bar hopping culture is so degenerate. In when I was in Europe for my last year of school, I always remember the bars would always let all of the girls in and give them free drinks for hours before any of the guys showed up. And I remember commenting with one of my friends that this whole concept of liquoring up the women before the guys even get to the scene is kind of like fishing with dynamite. And it takes the sport out of the entire thing. Which, this all modern culture around these things is totally... I don't even know why it never occurred to me how all of this stuff was just sort of nihilistic to the core. What was I thinking was ever going to come of this stuff? no one was really enjoying it. Everyone was trying to kind of get an experience out of these encounters that never really, they didn't even really want to go out clubbing. They just felt like they should go out clubbing. And the primary emotion everyone had when they were doing this stuff was that they were doing it wrong. No one liked the music, no one liked the scene, and when you were with friends, you were just having the same conversations you were having with them in a different place, drinking expensive alcohol and blowing money that you didn't really have because you were a college student, and feeding into an unsustainable system of education. So I'm afraid, Ben, I don't have anything really positive to say about this experience. What people need is that, again, they need a third place where they can come and have open discussions. And I've had a variety of those. I've had people have house concerts and theology discussion groups that were hosted out of sometimes Newman centers and sometimes people's houses. But they've always been dependent on the people and not the institution. And the more they're dependent on a scene or a pretense, the faker and more disgusting and more nihilistic they become. And the further away from that third place they seem to occupy. Man, millennials are the saddest generation that's ever lived. We went around chasing the baby boomers' 20s for our entire 20s. And we didn't ask ourselves at any point in our entire 20s and 30s whether what the baby boomers did was uplifting for our own souls. We just asked, are we following in their footsteps well enough to get what they got? And we missed the boat. We could have forged a separate culture for ourselves, and instead we just took the refuge from the baby boomers and tried to remix it into something that made more sense because we couldn't see an easy alternative. I think that the millennials will be a heroic generation, but they'll be a heroic generation in their 40s and their 50s when they discover that they are themselves individually not heroes. Because a hero has to learn humility before he can learn heroism. And the millennials start singularly not humiliated. They were too narcissistic. But thank you, Ben White. Sorry for the unsatisfactory answers, but there you go. Novum for $3 USA. Any advice for new fathers on what to tell their sons on how to deal with bullying? In the mid-90s, my dad told me to literally fight back, and it worked. But I also got sent to the principals a lot. Yeah, I have this unfortunate thing where I was getting picked on by a bully in 4th or 5th grade, and I fought back and I got sent to the principal. And I went into a depression for the entire year. And I became, I was a bigger kid relative to the other people in my class at that time. And from that point forward, I just totally eschewed physical fights or, tackle sports of any kind, even though it was probably well built for tackle sports because of that. And that was probably in sort of the traumatic events that formed my childhood. That one thing where I got into a fight with a bully and got sent to the principal's office is just seared into my imagination. What I will tell my son, I don't exactly know the situation, is just always stand up for yourself. Never say something you don't believe is true, and never back down, and have the self-respect to deal with people as equals. The fact that people are picking on you is something that you can resist even without violence, and you never want to be somebody who has to depend on the authorities to fight your battles for you. There are ways that you can mark yourself as not a victim. There are ways you can resist bullying. Because let's be honest, right? I mean, if you're interacting with a modern institution as a straight white man, I don't think that institution even can conceptualize you as the victim of bullying from a different protected class. That's not going to happen. So we'll need to learn ways to protect ourselves that are neither explicitly violent nor are simpering and sycophantic to the system that's against us. And I think sort of passive modes are the best way to interact with this. Standing your ground, learning the utility of silence, A classic example of this would be the Nick Sandman, the Kenosha kids from 2019, I think it was. Those guys were being bullied by a bunch of black activists, and they did the right thing. They stood their ground, they smiled, and they said nothing. And they refused to become part of whatever was going on with the bullies. And that's the only way that I think you can interact with bullies these days, because you can't fight the system and you can't appeal the system. So your two options are to stand your ground in silence and passively resist, or to exit the system as many ways as you possibly can. I think maybe a contact sport would be good for my son, though. I think I might get him into wrestling or something like that. I don't know, or minimally fencing. I think that tennis, which is the sport that I play, it's good enough, but it's probably not going to teach you much about conflict resolution. Although maybe not throwing your racket is part of that. Okay, Batman Bad for $3 Canadian. Hey Dave, long time lurker, first time commenter. I apologize if I frustrated you in the past. One's the positive thing that you think might happen? What's one positive thing that you think might happen this year or in the future? The positive thing that I'm really looking forward to happening this year is for us. First of all, I'm hoping that the establishment is going to take a number of PR, or is going to experience a number of public relations fiascos. That's going to have a bunch of people sort of questioning its legitimacy in a real way. I encountered this very nice. I've been getting out more and more, and my child's older now, so you get into situations where you interact with other parents more. And you realize, and obviously I try to avoid politics like the plague, but every now and again someone talks to you about politics, and there's been sort of this difference. What a difference a year makes. In 1 year, we've gone from this sort of triumphalism about sort of COVID and the bad Republicans, and now I had this conversation. It was really just him talking. But he was talking about all these points about privilege, and about this really confused thing about how we want our children to have educational advantages, but we want them also to not have undeserved privilege. And I think the only thing I said was kind of repost the question: how do you possibly give your children advantages without giving them privileges? That's completely contradictory objectives. Do you want your kids to have an advantage or not? But all throughout this entire conversation, where he said most of the words, it felt like he was having this conversation with me because he was deeply insecure about these beliefs. He wanted me to agree with him and validate him. And I just didn't have any validation for him. And that lack of validation was causing an enormous amount of stress. A few more of these public relations disasters on the part of the cathedral will generate more of these circumstances where everyone kind of feels that the moderate progressive worldviews are going away and disintegrating before our eyes, and that some new, hopefully more organic way of experiencing the world is the way to go. And this is sort of what I hope to see, and in the interim, I hope to see that our institutions coming online. There's a lot of interesting stuff coming out of the work that's being done around the basket weaving community, developing their own digital infrastructure to get people to meet up in real life. The conferences are a good sign. Right now, the in real life stuff is doing way, way, way better in the UK than it is doing in the USA. For the simple fact that we have to deal with way, way long. The problem with the U.S. is that a lot of people who like right-wing politics in the U.S. are rural people. And the distances in the U.S. are enormous. They're like 3 or 4 times, usually 10 times in a lot of cases, larger than the distances are in the UK. Therefore, the UK IRL stuff has been working a lot better. We need to increase our efforts by an order of magnitude before we get similar results in the US. But I'm encouraged to see some of that stuff come online, albeit slower than I had hoped, right? But the stuff that I was really hoping to do in 2018 and 19 when we did the Cana Society is just now starting to become possible. Because just now we've gotten critical mass and it's late enough to actually develop these things. It's like what Moldbug used to say, or still does say. It used to be way too late, and now it's only too late. And very soon, it used to be way, way, way too early, and then it was way too early, and now it's too early, and pretty soon it will only be a little too early. But as you get closer to when these things become possible, they start coming online. And, once you have a community that exists in real life, all of the dynamics change. They change very precipitously. The social dynamic between you and other people changes. They no longer have the option to just destroy all your friends by yanking your institutional cards. If you don't have a financial support network, you have a social support network. And that's the night and day difference that you can experience by meeting up in real life. But thank you, Batman Bat. I hope that answer was sufficient. I'm going to go on to the next one. Novum for $5 USA. I imagine one funny consequence of AI art and animation is that it will generate media of women that look so realistic it will outcompete with girls who try to sell their OnlyFans. We've seen a similar instance of this happening with VTubing. Well, I mean, this already kind of has happened with the whole anime girl phenomenon, or the 2D waifu phenomenon, where you have these Japanese guys just fall in love with anime girls and natural language processing machines. And I mean, I don't know, is this gonna, it would, I always think that we're going to reach a point where the thoughtery kind of burns itself out. Like, it's going to be like, it's going to collapse in on itself like a neutron star and stop giving off all the radiation that it is. But it hasn't yet. And I am very bullish about our prospects going forward as an ideological community with the based Zoomers that we have. But my big black pill is that there is going to be a generation of people who is more based than it is paused come about eventually. But that generation is not at least the first iteration of the Zoomers. It's probably going to be the generation after them, hopefully the generation of my son, that will develop instincts that are more aligned to real things and less aligned to all this fake shit going on, being auto-generated by AI stuff. I have to believe that at some point, being anti-porn is going to have to become a position that people understand and respect. And, oh my God, did I freeze again? I can't believe this. This is just it's atrocious. Maybe I can go to a different camera here. Okay. Well, okay. Is this better? I guess it's not better. But you look up at me now as opposed to down to me. Maybe this will kind of look horrible. Sorry, guys. Give me a second to fix this. Okay. You've convinced me success. You need new equipment. I guess there's no way to avoid it. Okay, that's better. That's more head on now. Okay. Yeah, I mean, how it reminds me of the Onion article that I liked back when I was a shitlib, that America's porn consumers demand a new orifice to ogle online. And that's always my reaction. I mean, how many different ways? I mean, at what point do these sort of naked bodies and brain dead women become not interesting anymore? Don't you kind of get over the trick? But nevertheless, I still see men my age who are completely just coon brained over this stuff. I don't know how they don't just get over this. It's boring. There's no relationship. They're not human. There's no actual, emotion to it or soul. And yet they don't. No. We just need to hit the button again. We need to porn harder, guys. Let's go for it. Okay. Thank you, Novum. Yeah, maybe chatbot GPT is going to kill the porn industry. One might hope that two implacable evils will self-obliterate each other. But, chaos has this demonic dimension to it where almost always the worst thing survives and emerges like a demon from the combination of two bad things, even if they're seemingly opposed. So I wouldn't necessarily hold out too much hope on that front. But going on. Novum for $10 USA. Time for my periodic Texas post. I was proposing a new rite of passage for young boys in the U.S. Make a pilgrimage to Texas and hunt at least one wild hog of significant size. They are classified as vermin in Texas, and once slayed, the boy will be treated as if he slayed a group of orcs and in a fantasy forest. Reminds me of the South Park episode where they level up in World of Warcraft by staying in the forest and hunting wild boars. But no, that would be really awesome. That would be really awesome. I mean, but come on. I mean, I know enough about hunting, to know that most hunting expeditions come up empty-handed. So it would require that you'd have to kind of go out there more than a few times to bag a beast, so to speak. But that would be kind of interesting, though, to have a coming of age, to kind of go out there and hunt by yourself and your friends. I mean, young men really need that. Young men really need to have circumstances in their young life where they can go off by themselves and be independent and kind of realize that they can sustain themselves by their own efforts, and that their lives are theirs to mold, and to realize that they're not just sort of like these pets of an institution. That the biggest problem in the modern university is that it creates this phony bubble of independence, and it basically teaches young people all the wrong lessons. It doesn't even teach them very many useful skills on top of that. It teaches them that they're the institutional pets of these larger educational apparatuses, and they're there to accumulate skills until some other institution can pick them up. Now, I mean, I agree with the Franklin on this front that young people probably should stay home while they attain their skills to save money. But to the extent that they have coming of ages, and to the extent that they need to leave the nest, they need to leave the nest under conditions of absolute independence, or at least virtual independence, where they can actually support themselves and kind of feel what it means to live. And let's not mince words here. What you're learning about when you go into one of these situations is you're learning how to fail. You're learning how to try to go for something and then just fail at achieving it. And I think this is something that most young people get from sports, but that a lot of millennials, especially a lot of nerdy millennials like myself, just were never had. They never grew up with it, and so they have this horrible relationship with winning and losing. But that's actually a good idea, Novum. Thank you very much for it. Leo John Ginnid for $5 USA. I never resonated with the label artist until now. I met a girl who just made me feel things I never have. For the first time being this beautiful woman has become my muse. It's such an amazing raw feeling. Well, I mean, that's perfect. I hope that. I'm here as me wishing you well in your wooing of this muse. I assume you have romantic intentions towards her. Maybe you've encountered a Beatrice who's your muse without any romantic intentions. But chase that moment. I mean, that feeling of animation and possibility when you meet somebody new is something that kind of opens up all sorts of creative potentials in your own mind. I mean, my YouTube channel is very much a product of me meeting for the first time the woman who's now my wife. And, those creative juices that flew from that initial meeting and relationship and courtship, that played into the person that I later, it flowed into the art. Call it art is kind of pretentious, but it flowed into what I was doing and producing. So absolutely, and these are the kind of experiences that you need to have, and it can only be had in the real world. And me and my wife met online, but I didn't really react to her until I met her in person. The only reason why I said yes to the date is I wanted to see Victoria, and I never had been there before. And so I was kind of expecting to not meet anyone particularly special. But she turned out to be the most special woman in my entire life. So there you go. I mean, but it takes the reality to generate that. It takes the reality to generate that. It takes the reality of playing a musical instrument and performing in front of real people to sort of learn the inspiration of music. It takes sort of getting your hands dirty with art to get the emotion of actually being a fine artist and producing something in the real world. And I know here I am producing a digital podcast, not really living up to the things I'm preaching right now, but nevertheless, it's it's true. I'm really happy for you, John. That's amazing. Jark for $5 USA. Hey Dave, didn't mean to be rude by correcting you. I think an interesting question of AI is how text-to-video models will make the creation of art way cheaper. With this, only the idea of the art remains, which might level the playing field. Yeah, I mean, text-to-video, that's an interesting idea. I mean, I'm wondering what I got wrong with the description of the neural networks. It's neural networks that are feeding into other models, right? Yeah, and it's deep learning stuff. Am I wrong about that? Is there another layer that I'm not understanding with this natural language processing stuff? Most natural language gains that we've had from text recognition, well, to this, I believe had been reinforcement learning neural networks. But maybe, Björk, I don't know how to pronounce these Icelandic names. Maybe I'm leaving out some critical feature of this, but thank you for the super chat. It's just, I didn't mean to put you down, but it's always oh my God, did I say something wrong? I'm supposed to know something about artificial intelligence here, although it's not my specialty. I consider myself reasonably knowledgeable. I've used TensorFlow before, right? But thanks. Yeah, I mean, I guess so. So if you had an animation that you wanted to animate, you could do proof of concept with that very easily through the use of AI. There's nothing that's stopping you from doing that anymore. But I don't know. I mean, would it lose something? It seems to me like it would lose something. I would have to know exactly what was produced by the AI and what was not produced by the AI before I consume something by an artist. Because if I were to watch a video and I knew that video was generated by AI, I would immediately start suspecting everything. Even if the script was completely organically written by you, I would suspect that I was being manipulated, and a certain part of my emotional reaction would be guarded and hidden. And I wouldn't open myself to be influenced by it. And I shouldn't open myself to be influenced by AI. It becomes sort of this portal to this sort of these demonic inclinations that reach out towards you. And these demonic inclinations could be just the sort of demons of the chaotic ether itself, or they could be literal people who have maleficent intent for you and your descendants and are trying to control you by feeding you ideology through the algorithm. And the neural networks obscures that, just like it obscures plagiarism by merging together plagiarized essays with seamless natural language processing. I mean, I like it, but there's a missing link here. Obviously, people of our persuasions have a problem with producing high quality video content. But I think that the solution to that is to go low budget rather than to go for artificially generated CGI graphics, unless you have some kind of organic way from differentiating what is the art from what is the shadow of the AI hand. But thank you very much, Björk. I really appreciate it. Not to get on your case for setting me off with the you got AI wrong. Okay, pseudo analyst for $25 USA. Billions must distribute. Oh yeah. I don't have that picture up, but somebody did like a Wojak of me. The nerdy Wojak with no chin. Well, they did one with a beard, and me with my kind of flat forehead type deal, and I look like a complete nerd pressing the billions must distribute button. I don't know. Fritz Imperial was telling me that I really need to shave the beard, but I kind of like it. It's hard to know how long to grow it, and it doesn't seem to be growing much longer. But I don't know. If you grow a beard, your face looks older. If you shave a beard, your face looks younger. And I'm kind of tired of looking like a younger man. I kind of want to look older than I actually am. And because I kind of play that role in this community as kind of an older voice, a signpost of the digital commons for the right-wingers of a new generation. And, so I have no problem being that. Although, the nerd Wojak meme of the distributors, maybe not so much, but whatever. All right, great. Novum for $10 USA. One funny victory in the dating world for me. Went back and talked to an ex, telling her that everything bad she thought of me was wrong. That she was incapable of listening to me, and I couldn't care less about her. Now she's interested in me again. I guess talking down actually works sometimes. Well, I mean, Novum, you're exploiting a well-known security defect in female software that's been recognized by pickup artists. Women respond positive. I mean, I'm not saying you should do this, but all men know that women respond positively to sort of negative behavioral patterns from men directed at them. What pickup artists back in my day used to call the neg. But this is something that all men kind of know, and including men who are married who love their wives. That a little bit of spousal teasing is something that kind of facilitates the relationship, and I mean that will work. I don't know what you're really getting. I mean, I really advise people to stay away from their exes. Are you trying to restart a relationship with this woman? I doubt it. It doesn't sound like you are. It doesn't sound like you'd want to. So, I mean, I know it's fun to do this. I know it's fun to kind of get women who attracted to you, even though you're not interested in them, because it feels like you're turning the tables on the fairer sex. You're giving women a taste of their own medicine. And, that's the famous song "I Will Survive" has that line in it. Weren't you the one who tried to break me with desire? And that's kind of the emotion that a lot of men have when they start feeling their oats, when they gain a little bit of confidence and a little bit of poise later in their lives. That, oh my God, like I actually have women who are desiring me. Now's my chance to kind of elicit desire in them and then not requite it. Guys, just don't do that. You'll regret it afterwards. You'll feel guilty. You'll feel guilty if you're a person who has a strong moral core. And even if you don't, you're going to get a lot of women angry and vindictive at you. And there's a lot of ways that vindictive women have at getting back at men, even confident men. So you only want to ever inspire desire in women who you want who you want to requite that desire, who you want to reciprocate that affection, who you want to build a relationship with. And any other woman who sort of desires you beyond that in a romantic way is a liability. They're a liability morally because there'll be a temptation, and they're a liability professionally and politically because they can cause an enormous amount of damage. So just don't play. I mean, I know you have this. You've encountered you've discovered fire. Don't start setting fires in women's hearts. It's not going to result for the benefit of anyone. So precautionary measures are needed. Creeper Weirdo for $5 USA. I have half softened on AI art. I recognize the X as dark 80s fantasy doesn't hurt anyone. The only problem is when people think ordering a cheeseburger makes you a chef, or typing a description makes you an artist. I mean, yeah, what you're really doing is you're piggybacking off of references that were sort of pre-formalized by other people. Other people came up with a template for what an 80s movie was. Now, maybe that template was put together by a deep learning algorithm who sorted a bunch of labels in a similar way that a Pandora algorithm does. Or maybe it was literally put together as a heuristic, the way I think the Dr. Seuss poem generator was. But either way, what you're doing is you're extracting an emotion, a spirit that comes from humanity at its core and is not itself generative. I don't know. I mean, the problem is just like, how do you use AI without it corrupting your art? It would have to be, you'd have to dissect the AI into components, like Bjark was saying, where you have the component that does text to video and use the components for your individual art project. That's the only way I could see this working out that wouldn't be just totally kind of opening up Pandora's box that way. Okay, Creeper Weirdo for $3. He says, and data theft from real artists. Oh, so he says, so that's a continuation. Oh, yeah, so ordering a cheeseburger does not make you a chef, or typing a description does not make you an artist. And data theft, it's just data theft from a real artist, is what you're saying. Yeah, I agree. But the problem, again, is that, I mean, what the chatbot AI really does, its biggest lasting impact on our generation is it's going to make plagiarism a thing again. It's going to make plagiarism virtually undetectable outside developing a relationship with the subject in question. And so it's seriously going to start undermining our concept of meritocracy. And we're going to have a very, very difficult time recovering from this. Okay, again, Ben White for $5 USA. Thank you very much. Hi, Dave. I read an article recently where young incel men were so frustrated with the fact they weren't having sex that they transitioned into women so they can have lots of sex. What's the cause of this? This is a sign of worse things to come. This was, what was it called? Transmaxing or femmaxing. This was written about first. I forget. I think Mary Harrington linked to it, but I can't remember. Was it Louis Perry who wrote this article initially? It was one of those sort of reactionary feminist types that's been growing increasingly prominent on the British right specifically, who forwarded this article, or maybe who wrote it. It was an article that premiered on Unheard about the rise of transmaxing. And this is the idea that these unmarried, unpaired men who have had zero effective relationships with women are discovering new life for themselves by taking HRT and cutting their genitals off and becoming kind of turbo thoughts of the new millennia. I mean, they're gonna. I mean, I understand that I've been making the same sort of bad prediction across this entire live stream. I've continuously been speculating that there is sort of a saturation point for degeneracy, a saturation point for pornography, a saturation point for thoughterry. But here I feel more confident in saying that we're going to reach a saturation point for loser men who think that they can hop the gender line to escape society's natural distaste for loser men. And, the first generation of these transmaxing individuals are probably going to be able to cash some checks in terms of being more socially acceptable on the left, and maybe getting more sex from progressive communities for a little while. But at some point, not everybody can hop on this bandwagon, and it's going to start bleeding its prestige. And the people who are going to feel this first are women themselves. Once the category of women has like a significant percentage of it being composed of the bottom 20% of men, then all of a sudden the category of women is going to be the subject of emotional and societal contempt that they never had been before. And saying, this and this is something that the community of women want, that's not going to carry very much weight anymore. Women have had this position in society, a position that I think that virtuous women deserve to hold this position, but it's kind of been eroded by feminism, and it's going to be destroyed by the trans-maxing phenomenon. This community has had political weight. Their needs, female tiers win in the marketplace of ideas because female needs, qua needs, are considered valuable, whereas male needs, qua needs, are considered irritating because men are defined by their ability to produce things and women are defined by themselves existing. And because of this, there's been a certain political clout women have been able to wield. That clout is going to be completely eroded. And female tiers are going to start winning in the marketplace of ideas a lot less once the female tiers being wielded are biologically male and coming out of a morbidly obese body with a 5 o'clock shadow and BPD and rage issues. This stuff isn't going to work anymore. There's a certain amount of just political physics that comes into play here, and I don't think you can push this envelope continuously. But as they say, Adam Smith said, there's a good deal of ruin in a nation, and there's probably even more ruin in a gender identity. And the prestige of women probably is going to have to crash a lot further before it finally hits rock bottom. John Leo Ginnid for $5 USA. When I was a teenager, I kept making fun of beatnik hipsters. Now my favorite YouTuber is a beatnik hipster. Here's $5 on me, Dave, the beatnik hipster. Dave, am I a beatnik? I guess because you're talking about like folk concerts. Like inside, I am not going to hide the fact that I do love Bob Dylan and that whole mid-20th century folk scene. I even like that horrible Coen Brothers movie. I like the Coen Brothers generally, but let's be frank. Inside Llewyn Davis is probably at the bottom of the Coen Brothers barrel. And I even really like that movie because of its evocation of the spirit of the beatnik generation, which I always thought was fascinating. Talk about how the mighty have fallen, and when you go from sort of the authenticity and excitement and openness and exploration of the beatniks, this sort of modern hipster culture, you just feel like you're stepping right off of the deep end and into a cultural morass. Okay, next one is from Nerve and VMaker, which I can't select for some strange reason. Okay, let's do this. Okay, here we go. Maybe your name is too long. All right. Nerve and VMaker. Can any right-wing art be important if important is defined by appealing to blue staters? It seems like in order to be considered important, any art would have to abandon the right-wing themes. Blue staters seem to be more and more stringent about art being progressive, the progressive line. Well, okay. Art does not need to appeal to progressives, but it needs to appeal to elites. So a great example of this would be Michelle. I always say Hollaback because that's how it's written, but it's Wellback. Although I do love the idea of, every time I think of Gwen Stefani's Hollaback Girl, I think of, Michelle Wellback because it's spelled that way. But it has to appeal. So important means that this changed my life. It does not mean it flattered my political preconceptions. According to, for instance, Steven Universe flatters the ideological preconceptions of blue staters. Now, despite the yeoman's work that Poe the Person attempted to do a few days ago defending Steven Universe is a hot pile of garbage, and nobody, honestly, over the age of 25 think that is genuinely important. Everyone knows that it is essentially claptrap that flatters the ideological preconceptions of a bunch of women in their late 30s. And that it really changed nobody's life, other than making them feel valid. It had some catchy songs in the first season. I'll grant that to Poe. Being important means that I am somebody who's a high agency individual, and this piece of work changed my life. And I think that everyone who's witnessed this work is coming to grasp with a new way of approaching reality that's more vital. And so you guys have to see this thing because it's going to change your life. This is so for those of you who might have, obviously, no one should follow me on Twitter because Twitter is a hell platform. If you're not somebody who needs to promote something, stay far, far away. But there's an argument over right-wing art on Twitter that Nerve AMV Maker is referencing here. And I noticed there is a common problem in how right-wingers described art. So this would be the common pattern. So there's this art that I like comic books. And then Comic Book Incorporated gets taken over by woke CEO and produces bad comic books. So I make new comic book company that makes good comic books, and then I solve the comic book problem. Because now I get comic books that are good the same way I liked all my comic books. They are of high comic book quality. That's fine. That's good. That improves your quality of life. That is not the instinct I associate with art. This is what I call the damn good hamburger problem. Like, I have a hamburger store. The hamburger store I had was taken over by bad management and started making bad hamburgers. So then I went to a new hamburger store and I got my hamburger and I took a bite out of it and said, that's a damn good hamburger. And I was thoroughly satisfied with it. That's not the reaction we want from art. What we want is, I see this piece of art and, oh my God, my life it's different now. Like, I have all these new ideas. And now you need to see this art too so that you can have new ideas and we can talk about all these new ideas that this piece of art's giving us. Bronze Age mindset, despite all of BAP's philosophical flaws, which I get after him constantly, is a perfect example of this. You read that book and all you want to do is have someone else who's read the book so you can discuss this book with them. There's other books like this too, but that's art. And it exists in food too, I think, but probably only in France and in Berkeley, California. I think of that famous scene from Ratatouille, which again, bottom of the barrel as far as Pixar is concerned, right? Where the food critic takes a bite out of the ratatouille and he's moved to tears, and he's transported back to his life as a provincial French child, and his mother made him the same meal. And that's exactly what the kind of thing you want art to have. Importance does, in some sense, mean power, because powerful people are attracted to importance. And so when Curtis Yarvin uses importance in politics, I want to be an important person. What most people say when they say I want to be an important person is I want to be a powerful person. But when I say I want art to be important, what I want art to do is to hit people with those moments where they feel like, my entire impression of the universe has been realigned. I need to, take a minute to think about this. That's the emotion I want to inspire in people. And, creating a new version of Marvel Comics that is like Marvel Comics was in the 70s isn't going to do that. And, and we can't be thinking in that mode. So that's really, it's not so much about appealing to blue staters. But I do know people of sort of the Brahmin caste are going to be looking for that thing. That's why I use blue staters, as corrupt as they are, as a barometer of whether art is hitting this note. Because I know that community responds to that note being hit. So without necessarily consuming the art myself, I can use them as sort of a proxy for whether this thing is actually attempting to reach at higher principles. Novum for $10 USA. The only Zoomers I've met that wouldn't welcome Trantor with open arms were the ones who were able to grow up in beautiful country with fair climate that was not a coastal city, perfect for recreation. Once all of this is littered by Walmarts and Starbucks, we're screwed. So for the audience who does not get this reference, Trantor was a planet from the first book of the Foundation series that was the inspiration for planets like Coruscant from Star Wars, or other city planets like the Hive Worlds from Warhammer 40k and Circuitine 1000, the city planet. And I think Trantor was the capital of the Imperium in that book. And the citizens of Trantor just... They can't stand being outside because they have agoraphobia because they were raised in a box, and that was their entire world. Sure, and look, they're building the pods for us as we speak. The only thing I can say is that humanity is going to be defined increasingly by its organic experiences and its organic relationships, because those are the things that are not going to be able to be easily mimicked by artificial intelligence. And it's those moments that we can have where we will be entirely undeceived about the nature of reality. Those will be the outline of our existences. Those will be the outline of our lives going forward. So we as a movement, and I think it is actually almost fair to call ourselves some kind of cultural or artistic movement at this stage, although certainly not a political one. Our movement has to be creating places and spaces and plans for people to experience those moments in, even while we're communicating in sort of an organic medium right here and right now. So thank you, Nofum, for the super chat. Badman Bad for $3 Canadian again. As somebody who works on and off in the animation industry, people are afraid of AI, but their biggest fears are really poorly run studios and their own art careers. Well, yeah, the big problem with animation is that Hollywood is completely out of ideas, and it's just rehashing old material. It's not trying to create human moments. It's not trying to create things that are important the way I was talking to Nerve AMV Maker about important things. And the lack of originality, if all your job is to facilitate the next Cal Arts animation style with the Josh Whedon dialogue tree, then no shit, your job's going to be absorbed by AI, because nobody cares that the thing is soulless, because everyone's known that thing has been soulless for at least 10 years now, and they still consume it. So I totally agree with you. Yeah, the real threat to AI at this stage is that it is the curtain for bad management and evil people, or people like Richard Hanania, who have their ass so far up the posterior, both literally and figuratively, of a linear statistical model that they can't see that the most obvious relationship in human history, that wealth causes secularization and not secularization causes wealth. They can't even notice that. The danger is being ruled by those people. It's not about Terminator, at least not yet. or not for the very, very foreseeable future, in my opinion. Okay, going on to the next one. Leo John Ginned. Funny story, a Gen X entered our Discord server of mostly Zoomers and Millennials. He always told us our generation were intellectually, culturally inferior and fragile. Then someone lightly criticized his AI art thumbnail on a video of his, and he went ballistic and lashed out at all of us and left. Well, I know, look, this is sort of the Rod Dreher effect, and I know this waits for all of us. But God help me, I hope that if I get to the point where my own generational instincts are way out of whack with what people need to hear, I'll have the good sense to kind of put down the pen until eternal wisdom comes to me, and only say something when I feel like I really have something I need to say. But yeah, I mean, this is the notorious boomer spur gout that they're so unused to what it is to live in the modern world that their confidence is entirely based on a stability that no longer exists. So once the stability is threatened, they spur gout and they lose their shit. And you see this with the Trump derangement syndrome. You see like perfectly good conservative people that have known for ages that secular society has just gone completely nuts, dump everything and attack their own community because Trump exists. Not because their community has been taken over by Trump or Trumpism. Trump exists, so all conservatives and all right-wingers have to be evil hypocrites that need to be destroyed. And I mean, this is a classic little nugget from the baby boomer generation and from the Gen Xers. And it's sad to see, but it's the sad reality of being caught in a moment where you're radically out of sync with a change that you didn't prepare for. Paul for $5 USA. Your view of art is pretty overwhelming. I pursued art as an amateur hobby, but now you're telling me I need to do some kind of spiritual leader? My fan art and OCs need to have some spiritual meaning? Well, I mean, okay, maybe I mean, can we draw a line between the artist and the craftsman? For instance, not to reference a guilty pleasure of mine, but in 2020, I painted a Warhammer army. I kind of stopped because I don't have any time anymore. But like it was fun, right? And there was a little bit of art to it, and it was really fun. And I know Sargon of Akkad also paints Warhammer miniatures. Is this art? And there's artistic decisions that go into it, but it isn't really like art how I would conceptualize art. What I would consider it is a craft. And if you're making sort of fan animations, and like I play the fiddle. I've written a few fiddle tunes. They all suck. They're all unlistenable, and I would never inflict them on anyone else. But most part, I just play classic old-time music that other people that have been written for 200 years, or maybe even 50 or 100, sometimes more accurately. This is this is am I an artist? I kind of, but really what I am is more a craftsman. And there's dignity in being a craftsman, and there's value in being a craftsman. But fundamentally, it is a simple thing that is about the practice of doing the thing. When I paint Warhammer miniatures, it's all about just getting my hands dirty with the paint and sort of feeling the physics of manipulating an actual object, and then kind of it's the process of doing it that I'm pursuing. I'm not thinking like, oh, I'm gonna like put this Space Marine in front of somebody, and then there's like a tear's going to come through. I'm like, oh my God, now life can begin. Now that I've seen your dark angels, like, this is like Dante encountering Beatrice in the bridges of Florence. That's not even remotely the same thing. So I mean, and of course it's not, there's different tiers of it. There's different mixes, but both are valuable. But when you step into the mode of an artist, and sometimes craftsmen do this like, temporarily, like they're craftsmen all their lives, and then one day they forge a masterpiece that raises to the level of art, and and they only do it that one day, and that's their career, and that's perfectly fine, right? But there is a distinction between these two acts. And the existence of AI makes the distinction all the more valuable to appreciate, because I will definitely admire somebody's Warhammer army, but I'm not going to admire a Warhammer army I know is painted by a machine. I'm just not. And because I admire the Warhammer army because I admire the dedication and value that people put into it. And I kind of share a moment of kind of understanding that, like, we shared this experience, but the thing itself doesn't imbue some kind of spirit in it. Although it's disturbing to think that it might have a demonic, like, negative spirit, which might be more likely in a disturbing kind of way, but I won't get into that. But there's a huge distinction between these things. Need to be differentiated, and it's proper to differentiate them in our language. So thank you. Oh, here's Hunger, my friend. And he has a super chat, $10. Evening, Dave. I see 250 plus viewers and 41K subs. If you're not on the basket weave, reach to somebody like me, Hunger Die on Twitter, or Not So Obvious, and get on the Discord Element server. If you don't have IRL friends, there's plenty to find online that are geographically closer than you think. Yeah, I mean, we are still in early days with this because, and first of all, everyone, I will post the Discord link after this live stream is done. I'm probably gonna be done in the next 15 minutes because I want to be done by 12. But this is still early days. We don't even have our main website up yet. And I think there's a lot of utilities there that will make it easier for people. But right now, I mean, the COVID regime is waning. This is the time to re-engage with reality. The cancellation culture is at a low ebb. It might go up again, so this is not entirely safe to do this. But if you're ever thinking about kind of testing the boundaries on sort of the barriers you put up between yourself and the mainstream, this is not a bad time. Because the cancellation campaigns are sort of a low ebb. But yeah. Let's reach out. Let's make some new friends. Let's find those third places. Let's become regulars at institutions. Let's share each other's hobbies and take the next step that way. Sam153 for $10 USA. Evening, Dave. Not convinced AI will ever move beyond programming parameters. People want to believe they can create artificial machine life that thinks like us. We don't even understand our own brains. Yeah, I 100% agree. That's my takeaway from the article, that artificial general intelligence will never be possible in the strongest sense. And the most likely we're going to get is sort of these mimics that sort of get sucked down the autistic rabbit holes that we ourselves fall down when we behave like robots, like Richard Hanania does in his own thought process. But yeah, Sam153, I totally agree with you there. Tactics 40 for USA $50. Well, thanks. No, he just says thank you, Dave. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that very generous super chat. Thank you for letting me finish a little earlier tonight. And we have Link for $10 USA. Hi, Dave. You spoke in your 2022 recent recap live stream about how Mr. Medicare leaving/dying has changed the feel of the internet a bit. Could you elaborate on how this changes the vibe or direction for 2023? I agree that it feels like the end of an era, just not sure what comes next. Yeah, I mean, in Mr. Medicare represented the internet mocking the absurdity of real life, clown world. So Mr. Medicare was the aristocrat of clown world. We are denizens of piss earth. We have to live in the real world. We have to live in this degraded, post-modern, cyberpunk dystopia. And the internet is not so much our means to lampoon a political reality that is more fake. Our internet is a very tenuous and dangerous life raft that we're seeking to kind of bridge over the problems that exist in our real life. One of the most prominent ones is being just generally isolated. Nobody is really laugh as much as you want, right? But we can no longer just sit. I don't know how Adam and Sitch's fans do this, where every week they get a new cringe left-wing figure and they spend 11 hours just laughing at him. as if there's going to be some kind of restoration of normalcy. There's going to be no restoration of normalcy beyond the normalcy that we build for ourselves in our alternative communities, which we can take definitive steps to build for ourselves with the right amount of will and the right amount of volition. Building that courage inside of ourselves is what the internet is for. And the people who want to laugh, I mean, Jim was a great comedian. But ultimately, the problem is that the greatest comedian on the internet, his life told a tragedy, and it's like the vision of Pagliacci, the crying clown, right? Laugh, clown, laugh, laugh, clown, laugh is what Pagliacci sings in the famous opera, and the tragedy is that like this person that's only good at making people laugh has encountered a reality that's just not funny, and as such we have to kind of deal with that, and there's sort of this ironic dimension to this, and that's sort of the lesson in Mr. Medicare. The reason why his life so perfectly embodies the internet, because the very thing that made him funny is what made his exit from the internet at this late date so tragic. And the fact that no matter how much we laughed at the absurdities of the world since 2014, the world only got more and more absurd. And in 2023, we have to admit, like, there's no Thermidorian reaction. There's no normalcy that's restored by Joe Biden. Things just kind of get continuously worse, and we have to put up with it. And that's what all of our laughing has achieved, and that's sort of the end of the story. And that's the vibe shift that I think Mr. Midakor's departure really embodies. But thank you very much, Link. Iron Duke for $3 USA. Dave, you have a great channel, and I would love to have you on my channel. Please ask the Franklin to join my Australia Day stream tomorrow. He's a great Aussie YouTuber. Well, yeah, as everyone knows, the Franklin was the channel that inspired my own YouTube channel. And yeah, he's a great guy. I love his lives. I don't always catch them, and sometimes I only have to watch part of them because I have just a lot less time than I used to. But I always love his his perspectives, and his edited videos are amazing. I really like them. His live streams are pretty good too, but I'll pass along a word for you, Iron Duke, and I'll definitely come on your channel. I hear Lady Shalot too. Speaking of Aussie YouTubers, she started a channel herself. Maybe a trend is going on, but yeah. Anyway. Hunger again for $10 USA. I could be presumptuous enough to recommend your child combat sports. I suggest wrestling at 5 or 6, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at 12, kickboxing at 16. Better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. Also, he'd be a stud. Yeah, he's a very large kid for his age. He's rounding out the tops of both the height and the weight spectrum. But yeah, he loves the outdoors. He loves the outdoors. The only problem is he's kind of a pushover. Like when we have him on the playground, he's just towering over all the other kids his age. And yet like tiny girls will come and they'll just push him out of the way and take his toy, and he'll just kind of like, go off and not react to it very well. So he's very much a gentle giant. But no, you have to, physicality and warrior spirit, something that has to be taught to young men. I don't know, wrestling, it's a good, I did like a year of wrestling when I was a young kid, and it was kind of fun, I guess. It's such a weird sport though, maybe like karate would be good. I mean, I know that's mostly like not useful in actual fighting, but Shotokan stuff. But I do think it's very athletic and beautiful, and I really like it. Maybe this is just me as a '90s kid reacting to watching the Karate Kid as a young guy, and kind of really vibing with that. But I think that would be a great one. PBK for $10 Canadian. Hey Dave, as an old Zoomer, I can say most Zoomers who are pretty pessimistic about technology's effect on us, and don't see a way out of the tech world. Since it's all we've ever known, When IRL get-togethers happen, we will agree that they are great, but then get plugged back into the net. How to fix it? Well, man, I don't. This is the only way to fix this problem with AI fakeness or internet fakeness is to actually put a higher premium on real life connections than you do from parasocial. I say this ironically because I know that like right now, with the exception of Hunger and a few other people who I know either as content creators or in real life, there's a certain parasocial dimension going on here. But the only way out of this for Zoomers is for them to see the real world and to decide that there's something in the real world that's worth more than all of the internet. If churches don't do this already, they have to do this. That we have to make our retreats, which I did as a Catholic grad student. We used to have these wonderful retreats. They need to get people to just check their iPhones for 3 days and go do a hiking trip or a cabin and do prayer life. I think 3 days is long enough to detox, and you're going to have 1 or 2 great experiences that you'll remember for the rest of your life. And if you can kind of gravitate towards those experiences and make them more prominent in your own existence, I think that's just a huge utility. And I think that might be the way. I don't know. I can't. It's like competing with drugs. Like I can't. Maybe people need to quit elements of the internet cold turkey to get this reaction again. But the only way to beat this is to just decide that their real life is worth more than the internet. So, I'll just say that again. I feel like a broken record a little bit, but thank you, PBK, very much. Samuel Hardy for $3 Australian. What are your thoughts on technology and education? My own Zoomer school experience has left me suspicious as the reasons given for convenience. And it's the future. Ignore the negative impact, such as porn. I think technology and education has been an unmitigated disaster. I think that the point of technology is to learn how to use technology. I can't think of a single space in which an iPad has an improved learning experience from paper. Considering that so much of grammar school is rote, the iPad distracts you and removes the focus that you otherwise need to have from an ordinary classroom experience. I'm really against technology in the classroom. Maybe to watch a movie or something like that. But even then, you want to make that minimal. You want to make the majority of class time should be spent with analog materials, unless you're literally learning a computer application. If you're learning to type, if you're learning Unix, if you're learning Python or C, if you're learning, computer science, go to a computer. Otherwise, what you're learning about is stuff in the real world, and you should stay in the real world to learn about it. And what exists online is a shadow. You don't learn about animals by studying their shadow. So why would you learn about the real world by studying the internet? The internet is real life shadow. The real life is not the internet shadow. That needs to be the number one thing the human race takes away from all of the things we've learned over the last 10 years. Okay, Creeper. Okay, so yeah, I answered that question. Creeper Weirdo for $3 USA. Do you have any opinions on the Crowder Daily Wire situation? I feel like it's the kind of thing that's right up your alley. Well, it's a fight between two people who I'm not particularly fond of. I appreciate that Crowder is a comedian, but his comedic style is just not my style. I much prefer people like Sam Hyde. And Crowder kind of cracks these sort of boomer jokes. He's like, he does the same kind of humor where you're laughing at Clown World, the same way that Mr. Medicare did, except Mr. Medicare was way, 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 way more funny. And so, it's like you're getting this like watered down product. And so I never really liked Crowder very much. And I know he kicks up this knife fight with the Daily Wire over, a contract that would make him liable basically for his own cancellation. And, Okay, I mean, Crowder has a point in the fact that if we're going to make modern day communities of content creators work, then we can't make creators liable for their own cancellation. That's impossible. We can't do that. But at the same time, the Daily Wire is right that a business model can't work unless they share liability. So I mean, there's sort of two sides to this equation. But pardon me, guys. There's two sides to this equation for sure. But it's something that we I don't know. I mean, what is there to say about this? Does the Daily Wire need to change its business model? I don't know. I mean, it could change its business model by discarding its lame boomer-com ideology and stop playing into the left's frame game. I mean, I'd prefer it change its business model in that direction, but it doesn't. It keeps on repeating the same Ben Shapiro stuff. So there's any number of things that I'd change about the Daily Wire. And I mean, Crowder could just kind of discard his fake edginess, but I guess that's his whole business model, isn't it? So I don't know. I mean, I don't really have anything to say about this. I'll be more emotionally invested. I'm already against fake controversies that are divisive. And I don't see why I wouldn't be even more against them when I don't like either of the parties involved. So thank you very much. Creeper Weirdo again. Also, Dave, if you finish your Shrek video because you can't get to where you were then, maybe you should scrap it and start over. Being a dad might give you a new and better perspective. Well, okay, yeah, I mean, I could do that. Or I could just, finish. I'll probably write it as a Substack essay, maybe. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. I'll just rewrite it, I guess. It'd be funny. But I need to get my most recent video out. For the computer science people, being a YouTuber, your videos go onto a stack, not a queue. So the last one you think of is always the first one you work on. So things get buried under your old work. But thank you, Creeper Weirdo. I'm sorry the background noise, guys. Novum for $3. Any advice for new fathers on what to tell their sons and how to deal with bullying? Wait, I already did that one. I'm sorry, Dreadnought. Dreadnought for $5. Read, degeneracy, petering out or not? Response to the possibility of degeneracy petering out. I think that it doesn't. It just gets more extreme, like pedophilia, murder, etc. To keep with the Warhammer 40k theme, the Eldar didn't get bored with degeneracy. They just got slaneshed. Yeah. I think that's certainly the case. I hope things are all right down there. But, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, at some point, society becomes this literally incapable of governing itself. I don't know. I mean, like, in Warhammer 40k, you can get so degenerate that you're literally, riding around space in giant ships, finding people to torture to death to keep your sexual perversions in line. But I think that level of extremity is outside of hell literally becoming manifest on Earth, impossible. And in our ordinary experience of chaos in the real world, chaos is literally a ruinous power and burns itself out. So, the wages of sin are death, and eventually death follows the chaotic. I don't know what is eventually going to end this particularly bad bout of chaotic spasming that we see in modern sexual degeneracy, but it has to meet an end somewhere because this is absolutely deplorable. Okay, last question of the night. Thank you very much, Dreadnought. Perfect, just on time. Okay. Also, what's the story of Richard Hanania? I never heard of him before you mentioned him. Yeah, he was so I think he was an academic think tanker in a university. And then sometime around 2020, he had sort of a series of wrong thoughts. He got kind of defrocked from his university, and he became a Substacker. And he wrote a series of kind of sort of Steve Saylor-esque Substacks where he went after a variety of left-wing orthodoxies that reigned in the university. But then in 2022, he got rehired by a university and transmogrified himself back into Steven Pinker. and then sort of wrote up a series of follow-up essays that completely undermined his main theses and his main force. And he's kind of been like this hobby horse of irritation for me, because it just shows you how like you can embrace all of the facts on the ground, and if your values are misaligned, you just spit out the red pill and go back to kind of working for the system and for the perpetuation of the system going forward, and feeding the very elements of modern society that you have complained about being stifling. You're now working as their handmaiden, and you have all of the facts right in front of you. It just shows you what they say, that Satan knows Scripture. He has all the knowledge of truth, but none of the ability to act on it. Okay, so it sounds like there's a minor crisis going on in my house downstairs. So I will put an end to the stream since we're at time and I've read all the super chats. But to send you guys out for Burns Night dinner, I'm going to read the several Burns poems, or psalms, actually. Here are his... he versified several psalms. So this is Robert Burns' version of the first psalm, and then the first 6 versions of the 19th psalm. It goes, for the first psalm: "The man in life, wherever placed, hath happiness in store, who walks not in their wicked way, nor learns their guilty lore, nor from the seat of scornful pride casts forth his eyes abroad, where with humility and awe still walks before his God. That man shall flourish like the trees which streamlets grow, that fruitful top is spread on high, and firm the root below. But he who blossom buds in guilt shall to the ground be cast, and like the rootless stubble tossed before the sweeping blast. For why that God the good adore hath given them peace and rest, but hath decreed that wicked men shall never truly be blessed. Shall never truly be blessed. And the 6th of the 19th Psalm. O thou the first, the greatest friend of all the human race, whose strong right hand ever has been the stay and dwelling place. Before the mountains heaven heeds, beneath thy forming hands, before the ponderous globe itself arose at thy command. That power with raised still upholds the universal frame, from countless unbeginning time was ever still the same. Those mighty period of years, which seem to us so vast, appear no more before thy sight than yesterday that's past. Thou givest the word thy creature man is to existence brought, yet thou sayest, ye are sons of men, return ye into naught. Thou layest then with all thy cares in everlasting sleep. As with a flood thou takest them off, with overwhelming sweep. They flourish like the morning's flower in beauty pride arrayed, but long ere night cut down its lies and wither and decayed. Well then, happy Burns Night, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the evening, and I'll see you next week for another episode of Broadcast from Fiddler's Green. Have a very blessed week, and keep weaving.